Tired of ordinary friendships? Looking for a brotherhood built on loyalty, honor, and absolutely no written contracts? Then join the Gambino loyalty package. For one low price of your freedom, finances, emotional stability, and possibly several close relationships, you too can enjoy the full benefits of organized crime membership. Benefits may vary by indictment. You'll receive a nickname you did not request, a social club with terrible lighting, several men calling you family, and the comforting knowledge that everyone supports you, right up until the federal charges arrive. Give them 30 years of loyalty, and they may reward you by shelving you. Outstanding. With the Gambino loyalty package, your status may disappear without notice, your friends may stop answering, and your legal defense fund may experience what experts call a sudden spiritual absence. No refunds. No appeals. No human resources. But wait. There's more. When the Brotherhood abandons you, simply upgrade to our federal cooperation plan. Trade decades of carefully protected secrets for potential leniency. Long meetings under fluorescent lighting. Unlimited courtroom appearances. And the exciting opportunity to explain why every envelope was definitely not a birthday gift. That's right. Yesterday, you were a captain. Today, you're Exhibit A with excellent recall. Cooperation may result in permanent loss of friendships, status, privacy, street credibility, and invitations to Christmas Eve induction ceremonies. Side effects may include deadlocked juries, angry former associates, and unusually strong opinions about the word honor. Discover the man who believed in loyalty, until loyalty checked the books and changed the locks. Because nothing says family like becoming a government witness after everybody stops taking your calls.
Disclaimer. The following program examines organized crime, murder conspiracies, extortion, racketeering, betrayal, government cooperation, and the remarkably flexible definition of honor used by professional criminals. This documentary does not glorify the mafia. It merely observes an organization in which stealing, intimidating civilians, and arranging murders were considered respectable career choices. But speaking to federal agents was apparently where everyone suddenly discovered morality. Some events discussed involve allegations presented in court, while others involve crimes Michael DiLeonardo admitted as part of his cooperation agreement. This is historical commentary and psychological analysis, not a medical diagnosis. No loyalty oaths were violated during the production of this documentary, mostly because we never took one. Now let's get into it.
Analyzing evil. Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo. Loyalty, betrayal, and the making of a mob informant. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. There are two versions of every mafia story. The first is the legend. The tailored suits. The social clubs. The whispered meetings. The solemn ceremonies. The idea that loyalty means more than blood, law, or common sense. Then there is the other version. The indictments. The surveillance tapes. The murder conspiracies. The cooperating witnesses. and the former friends explaining one another to federal prosecutors under fluorescent lighting. Mikey Scars DiLeonardo lived both versions. He grew up around the Gambino crime family, became a made man, rose to the rank of captain, and built close relationships with some of the most powerful figures in the organization. He earned. He obeyed. He protected the life. And for years, he believed loyalty would protect him in return. Then the indictments came. The organization turned its back on him. And Mikey Scars became one of the government's most valuable mafia witnesses. To the underworld, he was a traitor. To prosecutors, he was a gold mine. To the public, he became something much harder to define. A criminal. A victim of the very system he served. A survivor. An informant. And a man forced to confront the fact that the brotherhood he worshipped may never have truly existed. This is not just the story of a mobster who cooperated. It is the story of identity, loyalty, fear, humiliation, and betrayal. It is the story of what happens when a man gives everything to an organization that sees him as disposable. This is Analyzing Evil. This is Mikey Scars DiLeonardo. Loyalty, betrayal, and the making of a mob informant. Born into the life. Mikey Scars DiLeonardo was born in Brooklyn in 1955. The mafia was not some distant underworld he discovered as an adult. It was already part of the scenery. The social clubs. The neighborhood names. The men who never seemed to hold ordinary jobs, yet somehow always had money, influence, and a table waiting for them. To a young boy, that world could look powerful. Respectable, even. He did not see extortion. He saw authority. He did not see coercion. He saw men who entered a room and instantly changed the mood. He did not see victims. He saw winners. That is how organized crime recruits long before anyone says the word recruitment. It offers belonging before it demands obedience. A young man is given small errands, introductions, a few dollars, a little responsibility, and most importantly, the feeling that powerful people know his name. At first, the work may seem harmless. Carry a message. Make a delivery. Stand nearby. Do a favor. But every favor creates another connection. Every connection creates another obligation. And every obligation pulls the young recruit deeper into a world where loyalty is rewarded, silence is praised, and fear is mistaken for respect. By the time he fully understands what the organization is, his identity may already depend on it. His friends are there. His income is there. His reputation is there. His future is there. Leaving does not feel like changing jobs. It feels like abandoning the only version of himself that ever mattered. DiLeonardo later described becoming involved around mafia figures while still young. The neighborhood mythology gradually became his reality. The men he once watched from a distance became associates, then mentors, then brothers, and eventually superiors. The system worked exactly as designed. First, it made him feel special. Then it made him useful. Then it made him loyal. And once loyalty became identity, the organization no longer needed to force him inside. He walked in willingly. Because the greatest trick the Mafia ever pulled was not convincing the public that it was glamorous. It was convincing young men that fear was respect, obedience was honor, and prison was simply an unfortunate retirement plan. The seduction of respect. The Mafia offered Michael DiLeonardo a ready-made definition of manhood. Strength meant being feared. Loyalty meant obeying. Respect meant people lowered their voices when your name came up. This was not respect in the ordinary sense. It was fear wearing a silk tie. Inside that world, a man's value was measured by a different set of standards. Could he earn? Could he keep quiet? Could he follow orders? Could he absorb humiliation from someone above him without causing a problem? Could he hurt another person when the organization required it? The system took destructive behavior and relabeled it as character. Violence became reliability. Silence became honor. Emotional numbness became strength. Criminal income became ambition. And intimidation became leadership. It was one hell of a branding campaign. Once those values were accepted, morality became tribal. An action was not judged by whether it harmed an innocent person. It was judged by whether it helped the family. Extorting a businessman could be acceptable. Running illegal gambling could be acceptable. Participating in a murder conspiracy could be acceptable. But cooperating with law enforcement? Suddenly, everybody became a philosopher. That contradiction was built into the culture from the beginning. The Mafia did not teach morality. It taught compliance. Its code was not designed to protect neighborhoods, families, or tradition. It was designed to protect the criminal enterprise. Yet men inside the organization were encouraged to treat that code as sacred. That distinction mattered. Because once DiLeonardo accepted the Mafia's version of honor, every sacrifice made the organization feel more legitimate. The more he risked, the more he needed to believe the life was worth it. The more he obeyed, the harder it became to admit that obedience had been wasted. This is how identity traps work. A person does not remain because the system is healthy. He remains because leaving would force him to admit what the system cost him. By then, DiLeonardo was not simply around the Mafia. He was learning to see the world through its eyes. And through those eyes, fear looked like respect. Crime looked like business. And loyalty looked permanent. It was not. The name Scars. In the Mafia, a nickname is rarely just a nickname. It is a reputation compressed into 2 words. Michael DiLeonardo became known as Mikey Scars, reportedly because of visible scars on his face. Simple enough. But in the underworld, a name like that does more than identify a person. It creates a character. Michael DiLeonardo sounds like a man who might file taxes, argue with a contractor, and complain about parking. Mikey Scars sounds like somebody you do not interrupt. That distinction matters. Mob culture understands image. A nickname can make an ordinary man seem larger, harder, more dangerous, and more permanent than he really is. It turns a person into a story before the facts even arrive. The Mafia may claim to despise modern publicity, but it has always understood branding. Every neighborhood figure gets a title, a nickname. A legend. A story about the time he refused to back down. A story about the beating he survived. A story about the man who disappeared after disrespecting him. Most of these stories grow with every retelling. By the fifth version, a minor dispute becomes a neighborhood war, and a guy who collected gambling debts becomes Napoleon with a Cadillac. But the nickname does something else. It creates distance between the person and the role. Michael DiLeonardo was a human being with fear, grief, ambition, insecurity, and family ties. Mikey Scars was the identity built for the street. The man with standing. The man with access. The man people respected. Or feared. In that life, nobody spent much time separating the two. And once a man's entire value is attached to a name, losing the organization that gave the name meaning can feel like losing the self. That problem would come later. For now, Mikey Scars was still rising, and the legend was still paying better than the truth. Entering the Gambino world. As Michael DiLeonardo moved deeper into organized crime, the men he once observed from a distance became part of his daily life. He associated with established Gambino figures, operated social clubs, and built relationships inside a criminal structure that depended on money, access, and silence. The social club was one of the mafia's most important institutions. To outsiders, it could look like a neighborhood hangout. Men drinking coffee, playing cards, talking sports, complaining about business. A warm little gathering place, assuming you ignored the loan sharking, gambling, extortion, and federal surveillance parked down the block. These clubs functioned as unofficial offices. There were no employee handbooks, no quarterly reports, no human resources department. Just envelopes, coded conversations, and the occasional reminder that poor workplace performance could become a medical emergency. DiLeonardo developed ties to major figures in the Gambino orbit, including Salvatore, Sammy the Bull, Gravano, Frank DeCicco, and members of the Gotti faction. These relationships gave him access. And in organized crime, access is currency. Who knows you? Who trusts you? Who will take your call? Who will vouch for you when a dispute reaches the administration? The mafia likes to present itself as a meritocracy built on courage and loyalty. In reality, relationships mattered enormously. Talent helped. Earning helped more. But proximity to powerful men could accelerate a career faster than any speech about honor. Same as corporate America, except the company retreat might involve burying somebody in New Jersey. DiLeonardo also became involved in legitimate businesses. That overlap between legal and illegal enterprise was essential. Organized crime did not survive by standing outside ordinary society. It survived by entering it. Construction, trucking, restaurants, nightclubs, unions, real estate, financial markets. A legitimate business could generate income, provide cover, launder money, create jobs for associates, or offer access to new victims and contracts. The criminal world and the legal world were not separate kingdoms. They were neighboring offices with a connecting door. DiLeonardo learned how to move between them. In one room, he could appear to be a businessman. In another, a Gambino associate. The suit remained the same. Only the conversation changed. This flexibility made organized crime difficult to confront. The mafia was not merely a collection of street criminals. It was a network of relationships woven into ordinary economic life. Sometimes the threat was obvious. Sometimes it was implied. Sometimes no threat was necessary because everyone already understood the arrangement. That is the power of reputation. Once fear becomes institutionalized, violence does not need to happen every day. The possibility does the work. By this stage, Michael DiLeonardo was no longer being seduced by the life. He was participating in it. The errands had become business. The introductions had become alliances. The neighborhood figures had become colleagues. And the boy who once admired powerful men was moving closer to becoming one of them. The Gambino world had opened its doors. Of course, those doors only opened one way: a brother's death. On July 16, 1981, Michael DiLeonardo's brother Robert was shot and killed. Robert was connected to the Colombo crime family, not the Gambinos. That distinction mattered because the mafia's public fantasy of universal brotherhood ended wherever another family's jurisdiction began. Michael wanted answers. He wanted accountability. And according to his later testimony, he wanted revenge. But Robert belonged to another organization's world. DiLeonardo said the Gambinos had no authority to interfere in Colombo family politics. So the brother who had been taught that family came before everything was expected to remain silent while his actual brother lay dead. That is one of the ugliest contradictions inside mafia culture. The organization presents itself as a family. But when a real family member is murdered, grief must first pass through management. Who authorized it? Which family was involved? Would retaliation violate protocol? Would revenge interfere with business? Apparently, homicide required better interdepartmental communication. DiLeonardo had entered a world that celebrated vengeance, masculinity, and blood loyalty. Yet, when vengeance became personal, he discovered that violence was not truly about honor. It was about permission. A member could not simply act because someone he loved had been killed. He was expected to act only when the organization approved. The difference was not morality. Nobody suddenly decided murder was wrong. The concern was jurisdiction. Violence inside the mafia was treated as a controlled resource. It could be ordered, delayed, negotiated, or denied. This allowed mobsters to imagine themselves as disciplined soldiers rather than criminals responding to pride, greed, and fear. They did not murder impulsively. They held meetings first, very sophisticated. DiLeonardo obeyed the rules. He did not retaliate. That obedience may have strengthened his attachment to the organization rather than weakening it. The more a person sacrifices for a group, the harder it becomes to question whether the group deserved the sacrifice. Psychologists sometimes describe this through cognitive dissonance. When someone gives up something painful for an institution, he faces two possibilities. Either the institution is worthy of that sacrifice, or he suffered for nothing. Most people do not enjoy the second option, so they invest more deeply. They convince themselves the sacrifice proves loyalty. that loyalty proves character, and that the institution must possess meaning because the alternative is unbearable. Robert's death should have revealed the emptiness behind the Mafia's promise of family. Instead, it may have pushed Michael further inside. He swallowed the anger, accepted the hierarchy, and continued building his identity around the same system that had denied him justice. The Mafia did not need to comfort him. It only needed him to obey. And he did. Years later, the organization would ask for more loyalty, more risk, more silence. Eventually, it would abandon him entirely. But in 1981, Michael DiLeonardo was still learning the central rule of the life. Blood mattered, unless business mattered more. The Gotti era. By the mid-1980s, the Gambino crime family was changing. Paul Castellano was the boss. He was wealthy, powerful, and increasingly viewed by some street-level members as distant from the men doing the daily criminal work. Castellano operated more like a corporate executive than a neighborhood gangster. He focused on construction, labor racketeering, legitimate business interests, and high-level control. To his critics, he had forgotten the street. To Castellano, the street probably looked much better from a mansion. John Gotti represented something different. He was charismatic, aggressive, street-oriented, and surrounded by men who believed the Gambino family needed stronger, more visible leadership. On December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano and his driver, Thomas Bellotti, were shot and killed outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The murders removed the sitting boss and cleared the path for John Gotti to take control. It was one of the most famous mafia assassinations in American history. Broad daylight. Midtown Manhattan. A popular restaurant. Multiple shooters. Subtlety had apparently taken the evening off. Gotti's rise transformed the public image of the Gambino family. He wore expensive suits, appeared regularly in newspaper photographs, spoke confidently outside courtrooms, and survived several major prosecutions, earning the nickname the Teflon Don. Charges seemed to slide off him, at least until they did not. For younger mobsters and associates, Gotti became more than a boss. He became proof that the legend was real. Here was a man who looked powerful, acted fearless, challenged the government, and received public admiration for belonging to a criminal organization. The violence, intimidation, and ruined lives became background noise. The suit photographed beautifully. DiLeonardo became closely connected to the Gotti faction, particularly John Gotti Jr. Their relationship was not merely professional. DiLeonardo later described genuine affection for Junior Gotti. He became part of his trusted circle and served as godfather to one of Gotti's children. That bond created a powerful mixture of friendship and criminal loyalty. DiLeonardo was not simply obeying a superior. He believed he was standing beside a brother. This is how criminal organizations convert personal affection into institutional control. Friendship becomes obligation. Family ties become leverage. Loyalty to a person becomes loyalty to the entire structure surrounding him. Refusing an order no longer feels like rejecting criminal business. It feels like betraying someone you love. The Gotti era also intensified the conflict between image and reality. Publicly, the family appeared confident. Internally, it faced surveillance, informants, legal pressure, and instability. Gotti's visibility attracted attention. His confidence energized supporters. It also gave investigators a larger target. The mafia traditionally depended on silence and invisibility. Gotti brought theater. He treated the sidewalk outside the courthouse like a stage, and the public watched. Some admired him. Some feared him. Federal prosecutors took notes. The same image that strengthened Gotti's legend also increased the pressure surrounding everyone near him. DiLeonardo was now moving through the center of that world. The stakes were higher. The relationships were deeper. And the organization was beginning to look less like a neighborhood fraternity and more like a criminal empire under permanent investigation. But at the time, the danger did not weaken the attraction. It strengthened it. Risk made the life feel important. Attention made the men feel powerful. And surviving prosecution made them believe they were untouchable. The Gotti era sold the mafia as celebrity. Unfortunately for everyone involved, fame is a terrible hiding place. The Christmas Eve ceremony. On December 24, 1988, Michael DiLeonardo reached the moment he had spent years moving toward. He was formally inducted into the Gambino crime family. John Gotti Jr. was inducted during the same Christmas Eve ceremony, which was conducted by Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. Christmas Eve. Because apparently nothing captures the spirit of peace, forgiveness, and goodwill quite like joining a criminal organization built on extortion and murder. The ceremony was meant to feel sacred. The men gathered privately. The rules were explained. The initiate pledged loyalty to the family. He accepted the obligation of silence. He agreed that the organization would come before nearly everything else in his life. The symbolism was deliberate. La Cosa Nostra did not want membership to feel like a business agreement. It wanted membership to feel spiritual, permanent, almost holy. That emotional packaging gave an ordinary criminal conspiracy the appearance of ancient tradition. But beneath the ritual was a practical arrangement. DiLeonardo was agreeing to earn money for the organization, obey its leadership, protect its secrets, support fellow members, and participate in violence when ordered. The ceremony transformed criminal employment into personal identity. Before that night, DiLeonardo had been an associate. He could work with made members, earn for them, carry messages, commit crimes. But he did not possess their official status. After the ceremony, he was considered a full member, a made man. That title brought authority, protection, recognition, and a sense of belonging that years of service had finally earned. Inside mafia culture, induction was presented as an honor bestowed only upon men considered worthy. But worthy had a very specific meaning. It did not mean compassionate, honest, law-abiding, or morally courageous. It meant useful, reliable, profitable, and capable of remaining silent. The ceremony did not make DiLeonardo a better man. It made him a certified participant in the enterprise. But psychologically, the distinction was enormous. He had been accepted. The powerful men he once watched from the outside now recognized him as one of their own. That approval can be intoxicating, especially for someone who spent years proving himself. Every risk suddenly seemed justified. Every sacrifice seemed meaningful. Every crime became part of a journey that had finally produced status. The organization understood this. Ritual creates emotional ownership. A man who signs a contract may leave when the arrangement becomes inconvenient. A man who believes he has taken a sacred oath may remain long after the arrangement becomes destructive. He does not merely fear punishment. He fears becoming the kind of person who breaks his word. That is how the Mafia weaponized honor. It taught members to protect the organization, not only because they might be killed for betraying it, but because betrayal would destroy the identity they had worked to earn. DiLeonardo had spent years becoming Mikey Scars. Now the Gambino family had made it official. He was no longer standing near the life. He belonged to it. And from that Christmas Eve forward, every friendship, business relationship, and personal decision would be filtered through that membership. The ceremony promised brotherhood for life. Later, DiLeonardo would discover there was some very fine print. The brotherhood lasted forever. Unless the administration became suspicious, the money stopped arriving, somebody needed a scapegoat, or federal agents began asking uncomfortable questions. Then suddenly, sacred tradition developed an expiration date. The making of a captain. After John Gotti was convicted in 1992, the Gambino family entered a period of instability. The boss who had built his image around beating the government was finally beaten by the government. Sammy the Bull Gravano had cooperated. Wiretaps had done their work. The courtroom mythology collapsed under evidence, testimony, and the inconvenient discovery that whispered conversations are still conversations when the FBI records them. For men like Michael DiLeonardo, the fall of John Gotti created both danger and opportunity. The family still needed money. It still needed crews. It still needed men who could manage associates, settle disputes, supervise criminal operations, and deliver envelopes upward without accidentally becoming the subject of a federal exhibit. DiLeonardo continued rising. Eventually, he became a captain. A capo. That promotion placed him above ordinary soldiers and associates. He was no longer simply following the structure. He was helping operate it. As a captain, DiLeonardo could supervise crews, direct criminal activity, collect tribute, and serve as a connection between street-level earners and the administration. The position brought status. It also brought responsibility. In legitimate business, middle management is often blamed for poor morale. In organized crime, middle management may be blamed for missing money, failed extortion attempts, disobedient associates, government investigations, or the sudden disappearance of somebody everyone had been pretending not to know. The capo existed in the dangerous space between authority and vulnerability. He had enough power to attract envy, enough knowledge to become valuable to prosecutors, and enough responsibility to become disposable when something went wrong. Still, from DiLeonardo's perspective, the promotion represented success. He had gone from watching neighborhood mobsters to becoming one of the men others watched. Younger associates now sought his approval. Businessmen understood his connections. Other members recognized his standing. The identity of Mikey Scars had matured from nickname into office. And with that office came the illusion that he had finally secured his place. His crew became involved in several forms of criminal activity, including gambling, loan sharking, construction-related rackets, trucking interests, extortion, and financial schemes. The mafia liked to present earning as evidence of intelligence and discipline. A successful member was praised as a good earner. The origin of the money mattered less than whether the correct percentage traveled upward. That was the real spiritual ritual. Not the burning saint card. The envelope. Money flowed from associates to soldiers. From soldiers to captains. From captains to the administration. Each level took its share. It was capitalism with more funerals and worse employee protections. DiLeonardo's authority depended partly on his ability to produce revenue and maintain order. That required balancing relationships. He had to manage ambitious men beneath him, powerful men above him, and criminal partners whose loyalty often lasted exactly as long as the profit. A capo also had to understand the unwritten rules. Who could be approached? Who was protected? Which disputes required permission? Which businesses belonged to another crew? Which insults could be ignored? Which insults demanded a response? The mafia presented itself as chaotic violence from the outside. Internally, it depended on procedures, territory, hierarchy, permission, tribute, discipline. The rules did not make the organization moral. They made it efficient. For DiLeonardo, becoming a captain completed the transformation that began in Brooklyn decades earlier. He had once mistaken fear for respect. Now he possessed enough authority to generate both. He had once admired the men inside the social club. Now he sat at the table. He had once carried messages. Now his words could become orders. This was the height of his mafia identity. But it was also the point at which the trap tightened. The higher DiLeonardo rose, the more he knew. The more he knew, the more dangerous he became. To rival criminals, to prosecutors, and eventually to the very family that had promoted him. The Gambino organization had spent years turning Michael DiLeonardo into a trusted captain. Without realizing it, it had also created an expert witness with a front-row seat to the entire operation. That little accounting error would cost them later. Wall Street with brass knuckles. By the 1990s, organized crime was no longer limited to card games, stolen trucks, and envelopes passed across restaurant tables. The mafia had modernized. Not morally, obviously. Technologically. Michael DiLeonardo and members of his circle became involved in financial schemes, including stock manipulation and securities fraud. The old neighborhood rackets had found a new address. Wall Street. Because why settle for shaking down one shopkeeper when you can rob thousands of investors who will never know your name? These schemes often involved inexpensive stocks promoted through dishonest brokers. The price would be artificially inflated through aggressive sales tactics, false claims, coordinated trading, and pressure placed on brokerage firms. Investors were encouraged to buy. Insiders quietly sold. The price collapsed, and ordinary people were left holding shares worth less than the paper used to print the statements. It was commonly known as a pump and dump scheme. First, pump up the stock, then dump it on the public. Simple, efficient, and just respectable looking enough to avoid reminding everyone that the operation was essentially street robbery with telephones. Organized crime figures did not always need to understand every technical detail of the market. They understood leverage. Who controlled the brokerage? Who could pressure the brokers? Who could prevent employees from asking questions? Who could intimidate a partner who suddenly developed a conscience? The mafia's contribution was often not financial brilliance. It was fear. A dishonest businessman might cheat an investor. A dishonest businessman backed by organized crime could cheat investors while ensuring that nobody inside the operation became enthusiastic about cooperating with regulators. DiLeonardo's involvement in modern financial crime demonstrated how easily the mafia adapted. The mythology preferred old rituals, made men, social clubs, neighborhood territory. But the business followed money. If money moved into construction, the mafia followed construction. If money moved through unions, it followed unions. If money moved through the stock market, suddenly men who once settled disputes with baseball bats were developing strong opinions about securities. The language changed. The behavior did not. Extortion became consulting. Market manipulation became investment strategy. Threats became business pressure. And stolen money became revenue. This ability to blend legitimate and illegitimate business made organized crime especially dangerous. The victims might never see the people responsible. There was no broken storefront, no bruised shop owner, no body discovered in a parking lot. There were simply retirement accounts, savings, and investments that mysteriously disappeared. Distance made the crime easier to rationalize. When a victim is standing in front of you, fear has a face. When the victim is represented by a number on a brokerage statement, theft can feel abstract, clean, professional, almost harmless. It was not. Financial crimes can destroy families without firing a shot. They can erase years of savings, delay retirement, wipe out college funds, and leave victims blaming themselves because the criminals presented the fraud as opportunity. That was the beauty of the scheme. The victim handed over the money voluntarily, at least until the truth arrived. DiLeonardo had become part of a criminal generation that moved comfortably between old-school intimidation and modern financial fraud. He could understand the social club and the brokerage office, the street and the boardroom, the envelope and the stock certificate. This was not the fading mafia of nostalgic movies. It was an adaptive criminal business looking for new markets. And the stock market offered everything organized crime loved: money, complexity, weak oversight, greedy partners, and enough paperwork to make the robbery look legitimate until everyone involved had already bought a house in Florida. But modern crime brought modern evidence: brokerage records, recorded calls, financial trails, electronic transactions. Witnesses who understood that federal prison had terrible benefits. The same system that allowed the operation to grow also produced a detailed map of where the money traveled. DiLeonardo's world was expanding. So was the government's case. The mafia had entered Wall Street believing it could control the market through pressure and fear. Instead, it discovered that numbers talk, And unlike made men, spreadsheets do not take an oath of silence. The mythology preferred old rituals. Made men. Social clubs. Neighborhood territory. But the business followed money. If money moved into construction, the mafia followed construction. If money moved through unions, it followed unions. If money moved through the stock market, suddenly men who once settled disputes with baseball bats were developing strong opinions about securities. The language changed. The behavior did not. Extortion became consulting. Market manipulation became investment strategy. Threats became business pressure. And stolen money became revenue. This ability to blend legitimate and illegitimate business made organized crime especially dangerous. The victims might never see the people responsible. There was no broken storefront, no bruised shop owner, no body discovered in a parking lot. There were simply retirement accounts, savings, and investments that mysteriously disappeared. Distance made the crime easier to rationalize. When a victim is standing in front of you, fear has a face. When the victim is represented by a number on a brokerage statement, theft can feel abstract. Clean. Professional. Almost harmless. It was not. Financial crimes can destroy families without firing a shot. They can erase years of savings, delay retirement, wipe out college funds, and leave victims blaming themselves because the criminals presented the fraud as opportunity. The Gold Club spectacle. In September 2000, Michael DiLeonardo was indicted in Atlanta as part of the sprawling federal case surrounding the Gold Club. The Gold Club was not a discreet neighborhood bar where two guys quietly discussed gambling debts over espresso. It was one of Atlanta's most famous adult entertainment clubs. Celebrities went there. Professional athletes went there. Businessmen went there. And according to federal prosecutors, Gambino crime family interests followed the money through the front door. The government accused club owner Steve Kaplan and numerous co-defendants of participating in a racketeering enterprise involving prostitution, credit card fraud, money laundering, bribery, and organized crime influence. DiLeonardo was accused of helping extort money from Scores, an upscale club in Manhattan, and receiving protection payments connected to the Gold Club on behalf of the Gambino family. The trial began in 2001 and quickly became a national circus. Athletes, entertainers, dancers, mob allegations, enormous nightclub bills, corrupt police accusations, and enough tabloid material to keep every newsroom in America fully caffeinated. The prosecution argued that the Gold Club was more than a successful nightclub. It was allegedly a criminal operation where illegal services, financial fraud, and mafia influence were mixed together beneath expensive lights. The defense challenged the government's witnesses, evidence, and attempt to connect individual defendants to the broader enterprise. For DiLeonardo, the central question was whether prosecutors could prove that he personally participated in the charged racketeering activity. Being photographed with mobsters was not enough. Knowing criminals was not enough. Having a nickname that sounded pre-approved by central casting was not enough. The government still had to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. During the proceedings, the jury saw evidence of DiLeonardo's relationship with John Gotti and the wider Gambino world. To prosecutors, those connections helped establish context. To the defense, context was not proof. That distinction matters. A defendant may be deeply involved in organized crime and still be found not guilty of a specific case. Trials do not determine whether someone has generally lived a questionable life. Federal court is not Yelp for character. On August 30th, 2001, after a trial that lasted several months, the jury acquitted DiLeonardo of every charge against him. He had beaten the case. For a Gambino captain already accustomed to status and survival, the acquittal likely felt like confirmation. He had faced federal prosecutors in a sensational trial and walked away. The government had presented its evidence. The jury had rejected the charges against him. Inside mafia culture, that kind of courtroom victory could become part of a man's legend. He had remained silent. He had survived. He had protected the family. And he had not folded under pressure. The life appeared to have rewarded his loyalty. An acquittal can produce relief. It can also produce dangerous confidence. After surviving a major prosecution, a defendant may begin believing he understands the system, that investigators cannot reach him, that witnesses will always collapse under cross-examination, that prosecutors have more ambition than evidence, and that the organization standing behind him really will remain loyal when the next indictment arrives. One courtroom victory begins feeling like permanent immunity. John Gotti had learned the same lesson after earlier acquittals. He earned the name Teflon Don. Then federal prosecutors returned with recordings and Sammy Gravano. Teflon, it turned out, had a warranty. DiLeonardo's acquittal did not mean the government had lost interest in him. It meant prosecutors had failed to prove that particular case. Investigators still knew his name. They still understood his position. And they were still examining Gambino activity in New York. The Gold Club case also exposed the strange overlap between celebrity culture and organized crime. Professional athletes and entertainers appeared in testimony because the club had cultivated famous customers. Publicity attracted business. Business produced money. Money attracted criminals. And criminals eventually attracted federal agents. It was an economic ecosystem powered by cash, vanity, secrecy, and men who believed receipts were optional. The Gold Club itself would not survive the case in its original form. Kaplan ultimately pleaded guilty to a racketeering charge as part of an agreement requiring the club's closure and substantial financial penalties. But DiLeonardo walked out acquitted. For the moment, Mikey Scars appeared stronger than ever. He was a Gambino captain, a trusted figure, a proven earner, and now a man who had faced one of the most sensational federal racketeering trials in the country and emerged without a conviction. The legend continued growing, but the victory concealed a deeper danger. The Gold Club trial had shown prosecutors exactly how valuable DiLeonardo might become. He understood the Gambino family. He understood its businesses. He understood its relationships. He understood how legitimate enterprises could be used to support criminal interests. And unlike lower-level associates, he possessed knowledge stretching upward through the hierarchy. In 2001, that knowledge protected the organization because DiLeonardo remained silent. Soon, the Gambino family would give him a reason to reconsider. The Gold Club case convinced Mikey Scars that he could survive the government. The next case would teach him that surviving the mafia was a different goddamn problem. The indictment that changed everything. In June 2002, Michael DiLeonardo was indicted again. This time, the case was not wrapped in nightclub lights, celebrity testimony, and tabloid spectacle. This case reached directly into the machinery of the Gambino crime family. Federal prosecutors charged DiLeonardo with racketeering-related crimes that included labor racketeering, extortion, loan sharking, witness tampering, and participation in the conspiracy surrounding the murder of Frederick "Freddie" Weiss. The government believed Weiss had been killed in September 1989 because Gambino leaders feared he might cooperate with federal authorities. In other words, the organization allegedly responded to the possibility of an informant by arranging a murder. A calm, measured workplace disciplinary procedure. According to federal authorities, Weiss was involved in a contaminated landfill scheme and had attracted the attention of investigators. Senior Gambino figures allegedly became concerned that the pressure might cause him to speak. John Gotti reportedly approved the killing, and the assignment was carried out with assistance from members and associates connected to both the Gambino and De Cavalcante crime families. DiLeonardo was not accused of firing the fatal shots, but prosecutors allege that he participated in the conspiracy leading to the murder. That distinction mattered legally. In organized crime, a man did not need to pull the trigger to become responsible for the death. He could attend meetings, carry messages, provide information, assist with planning, or help create the conditions that allowed the killing to happen. The mafia loved to divide responsibility into tiny portions. One man gave the order. Another passed it along. Someone located the target. Someone drove the car. Someone fired the weapon. Then everybody went home convinced the murder mostly belonged to somebody else. Federal conspiracy law was less sentimental. The indictment placed DiLeonardo in a dramatically different position from the Gold Club prosecution. The earlier case had ended in acquittal. Now he faced allegations tied to murder, obstruction, and the core operations of the Gambino family. A conviction could mean decades in federal prison, possibly the remainder of his life. That possibility changes the atmosphere. The tailored suits become prison uniforms. The social club becomes a visitation room. The endless speeches about honor become much less inspiring when read beneath fluorescent lights while a correctional officer counts the minutes. DiLeonardo had survived prosecution before, but this case carried different weight. The government was not merely accusing him of collecting money from a corrupt business. It was presenting him as a senior participant in an organization that used violence to protect itself. The indictment also threatened to expose years of criminal relationships. A racketeering case does not focus on one isolated act. It tells a larger story. The hierarchy, the crews, the businesses, the meetings, the money, the violence, the witnesses. Every relationship becomes evidence. Every introduction becomes suspicious. Every old friend becomes a potential government exhibit. DiLeonardo now confronted the brutal mathematics of organized crime. The more important he had become inside the Gambino family, the more dangerous the case against him became. His rank gave him prestige on the street. In court, it gave prosecutors a theory. His relationships gave him protection inside the organization. In an indictment, they became connections between criminal acts. His knowledge made him valuable to the family. It also made him valuable to the government. The very qualities that had built Mikey Scars were now tightening around Michael DiLeonardo. He had spent decades proving he could be trusted with secrets. Now those secrets could either bury him or save him. At first, loyalty still held. DiLeonardo did not immediately cooperate. He remained part of the culture that treated silence as the final measurement of a man. He had taken the oath, accepted the rank, benefited from the organization, and watched what happened to people suspected of speaking. Freddie Weiss was not merely another murder allegation. He represented the consequence of becoming a potential witness. The message was not complicated. Talk and die. Yet the mafia's power depended upon more than fear of violence. It depended upon members believing the organization would support them in return. A man kept silent because he feared punishment. But he also kept silent because he expected lawyers, money, status, and protection. The agreement was never written down. That would have been inconvenient during discovery. But every made man understood the supposed arrangement. You protect the family. The family protects you. DiLeonardo had already risked his freedom for the Gambinos. He had survived the Gold Club trial without breaking. He had risen to captain. He had stood close to the Gotti family. He believed his history meant something. Then, while he sat in custody facing devastating charges, he began receiving information from the street. The Gambino administration was questioning him. Money was being disputed. His loyalty was being doubted. The men he considered brothers were not preparing to save him. They were preparing to remove him. This was the moment the 2002 indictment became more than a legal crisis. It became a crisis of faith. The federal government was threatening to take away his future. The mafia was threatening to erase his past. DiLeonardo found himself trapped between two institutions. One openly called him a criminal. The other had spent decades praising his loyalty and was now acting as though he had never mattered. For years, Mikey Scars had believed the greatest threat came from law enforcement. He was about to discover that the most devastating blow would come from inside the family. Not with a bullet. Not with a wiretap. Not with another indictment. With rejection. And for a man whose entire identity depended upon belonging, rejection could be more powerful than any prison sentence. Shelved by the family. While Michael DiLeonardo sat in federal custody, the organization he had served for decades began pulling away from him. The money stopped, support disappeared, questions started circulating about his loyalty and finances. According to DiLeonardo's later account, members of the Gambino administration accused him of keeping money that belonged to the family. He denied it. From his perspective, the accusation was not merely false, it was insulting. He had spent years earning for the organization, following orders, accepting risk, and proving that he could be trusted. Now, when he faced the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison, the same men who preached loyalty were apparently conducting an internal audit. Nothing says brotherhood like checking the books while your brother is sitting in a federal cell. DiLeonardo reportedly sent word back to the family. He reminded them that he was not dead. He had not received a final sentence. He might defeat the charges, return home, and resume his position. The message was clear. Do not bury me while I am still breathing. The Gambino administration did not restore him. Instead, DiLeonardo was shelved. Within mafia culture, shelving a member meant stripping him of active status and isolating him from the organization. He remained technically inducted, but he could no longer participate in family business. Members were expected to avoid him. His crew, influence, and authority could be taken away. He had not been formally expelled because the mafia loved permanent membership almost as much as it loved pretending its rules were consistent. But in practical terms, Mikey Scars had been erased. For an ordinary employee, losing a position can be devastating. For DiLeonardo, this was not an ordinary position. The Gambino family had shaped his identity since he was young. His friendships came from the life, his reputation came from the life, his authority came from the life. Even the name Mikey Scars carried meaning because of the world surrounding it. Being shelved did not simply remove him from criminal business. It told him that the person he had spent decades becoming no longer mattered. That kind of rejection attacks more than pride. It attacks memory. Every sacrifice DiLeonardo had made now demanded reconsideration. His brother's death, the years of obedience, the criminal risks, the time spent earning, the ceremonies, the friendships, the loyalty shown during the Gold Club prosecution. Had any of it meant what he believed it meant, or had the organization valued him only while he was profitable and available? That question was dangerous. The mafia survived because members treated loyalty as sacred. Once a member realized loyalty was conditional, the emotional structure began to collapse. DiLeonardo had been taught that betrayal came from informants. Traitors spoke to the government. Traitors abandoned their brothers. Traitors protected themselves at the expense of the family. But from inside his cell, he could now construct a different story. He had remained silent. He had faced prosecution. He had not abandoned the organization. The organization had abandoned him. This did not erase his crimes. It did not transform him into an innocent victim, but it changed the moral equation inside his own mind. If the Gambino family had already broken faith, what did he still owe it? That question would become the bridge between loyalty and cooperation. For years, DiLeonardo had believed the mafia oath was permanent. Now he discovered that permanence flowed in only one direction. The member owed everything. The institution owed whatever it found convenient. This is common in coercive organizations. They demand unconditional loyalty while offering conditional acceptance. A member is called family while he is useful. Once he becomes expensive, difficult, or dangerous, the language changes. Suddenly, he is a liability, a problem, a suspicious person, a man whose contributions have been forgotten with remarkable administrative efficiency. DiLeonardo had helped enforce that system against others. Now the machinery had turned toward him. Only then did its cruelty become impossible to ignore. That is one of the darker truths in his story. He did not discover the mafia was unfair when it harmed civilians. He discovered it when it harmed him. Until that moment, the system was tradition. When he became the target, it became betrayal. Still, the emotional damage was real. The Gambino family had not merely removed a captain, it had dismantled the foundation of his identity while he was already facing overwhelming legal pressure. The federal government threatened his freedom. The mafia had taken his belonging. His future looked like prison. His past looked like a lie. And the men he considered brothers were treating him like a line item they no longer wished to carry. The organization had taught Mikey Scars that a man without loyalty was nothing. Then it stripped away the only loyalty he believed he possessed. The mafia did not yet realize what it had created: a rejected captain, a wounded friend, a frightened defendant, and a man carrying decades of secrets with nobody left to protect. They had shelved Michael DiLeonardo. Soon he would begin opening the files. The collapse of Mikey Scars. Being shelved did not merely cost Michael DiLeonardo his position. It shattered the identity beneath it. For decades, he had understood himself through the Gambino crime family. He was a made man, a captain, a trusted friend of John Gotti Jr., a man whose value came from loyalty, access, earning power, and the belief that he belonged to something permanent. Now he sat in federal custody, facing the possibility of life in prison, while the organization treated him as disposable. The government had taken his freedom. The mafia had taken his name. Michael DiLeonardo was still alive, but Mikey Scars was disappearing. That psychological distinction mattered. A person can survive losing money. He can survive losing rank. He can even survive public humiliation. But when every source of identity collapses at once, survival becomes harder to imagine. DiLeonardo was confronting several disasters simultaneously. He faced devastating criminal charges. His finances and legal future were uncertain. His relationship with the Gambino family had been severed. Men he considered brothers had rejected him, and cooperation would require him to destroy the code around which he had built his entire adult life. There was no clean exit. Remain silent, and he might die in prison protecting men who had abandoned him. Cooperate, and he would become the thing he had spent decades despising: an informant, a rat, a traitor. The mafia had given those words enormous power. They did not merely describe an action. They described a person who supposedly deserved no respect, no forgiveness, and perhaps no life. DiLeonardo had absorbed that belief deeply. Turning against the family would not feel like making a legal decision. It would feel like committing psychological suicide. But remaining loyal offered no rescue. The family was no longer supporting him. Its leadership questioned him. His status had been stripped away. The Sacred Brotherhood had become a group of men discussing whether he was worth the expense. This trapped DiLeonardo between two unbearable futures. In one, he remained Mikey Scars and spent his life in federal prison. In the other, he survived as Michael DiLeonardo, but destroyed Mikey Scars forever. That is not an excuse for his past crimes. It is an explanation of the crisis. DiLeonardo had chosen the mafia repeatedly. He had benefited from its authority, participated in its criminal world, helped maintain the culture of silence now suffocating him. But when that culture turned against him, he experienced its full emotional force. The rules he had helped enforce became the walls closing around him. The threats once aimed at other people now lived inside his own mind. According to later accounts, DiLeonardo fell into severe emotional distress during this period. He reportedly attempted to take his own life. That part of the story deserves seriousness. Whatever judgment is made about his crimes, suicidal crisis is not evidence of cowardice, weakness, or theatrical guilt. It is evidence that a person has reached a point where pain has narrowed his ability to see another future. DiLeonardo's world had contracted to punishment, betrayal, shame, and fear. The criminal identity that once made him feel powerful now left him unable to imagine himself outside it. That is the final cruelty of organizations built around total loyalty. They do not simply control behavior. They colonize identity. The member is taught that leaving means becoming worthless. That rejection means becoming nobody. That survival outside the group is worse than destruction inside it. For years, DiLeonardo had helped preserve that system. Now he was its prisoner. The mafia demanded emotional silence as well as criminal silence. Fear could not be admitted. Grief had to be swallowed. Doubt had to be hidden. A made man was expected to appear strong, even while his life collapsed around him. The performance never ended. That performance may have intensified the crisis. DiLeonardo could not easily confess weakness to the men around him. Weakness threatened reputation. Reputation threatened safety. And safety depended upon appearing like Mikey Scars, even when Michael DiLeonardo was breaking apart. The identity had become armor. Now the armor was crushing the man inside it. His relationship with John Gotti Jr. made the situation even more painful. DiLeonardo did not view Jr. merely as a criminal superior. He considered him a close friend. A brother in every emotional sense the mafia claimed to represent. Cooperation could mean testifying against someone he loved. It could mean publicly describing conversations, relationships, and crimes that had once been protected by trust. The government saw information. DiLeonardo saw memories. The prosecutors saw a witness. He saw the destruction of his old life. This is why cooperation did not begin with a triumphant moral awakening. There was no sudden burst of sunlight through the cell window. No dramatic realization that crime was wrong. No choir waiting outside the interview room. The decision emerged from pressure, rejection, fear, anger, grief, and survival. Very human motives. Messy motives. Motives that do not fit neatly into either the mafia's story or the government's. The mafia would later portray DiLeonardo as a coward who betrayed his friends to save himself. That explanation contains part of the truth. He was trying to save himself. But the organization conveniently ignored its own role. It had removed him, accused him, cut off support, and demonstrated that decades of loyalty could vanish the moment leadership considered him inconvenient. Then it expected eternal silence as a final act of devotion. A beautiful arrangement. The family kept the benefits. The defendant kept the sentence. DiLeonardo began confronting a possibility he had resisted for most of his life. Perhaps the mafia's code of honor was not honorable. Perhaps omerta existed primarily to protect powerful criminals from consequences. Perhaps the brotherhood was strongest only when money was flowing upward. And perhaps dying in prison for men who had already rejected him was not loyalty. Perhaps it was waste. That thought did not immediately erase fear. It did not erase affection for Junior Gotti. It did not erase decades of conditioning. But once the thought entered his mind, the old structure could not fully recover. The mythology had cracked. Through that crack came anger, then doubt, then the possibility of cooperation. Michael DiLeonardo had reached the lowest point of his life. His organization no longer wanted him. His future appeared buried beneath federal charges. His identity had collapsed. And the code that once gave him purpose now offered only punishment. The government was waiting with a proposition. Tell the truth about the family. Admit his own crimes. Testify against former friends. And perhaps receive another chance at life. For Mikey Scars, it was betrayal. For Michael DiLeonardo, it was becoming the only door left in the room. The decision to cooperate. In 2002, Michael DiLeonardo made the decision that would permanently divide his life into two parts. Before cooperation, and after it. He agreed to speak with federal authorities. For the government, this was a major breakthrough. DiLeonardo was not a frightened street associate with fragments of second-hand gossip. He was a Gambino captain, a formerly inducted member, a man with decades of access to the family's hierarchy, rituals, businesses, disputes, alliances, and criminal activity. He knew the people. He knew the structure. He knew which conversations mattered and which men merely enjoyed sitting near important people while pretending they were part of the conversation. The government had acquired something investigators spend years trying to obtain. An insider who could explain not only what happened, but how the entire organization worked. For DiLeonardo, however, cooperation was not simply an exchange of information for leniency. It was the destruction of an identity. The mafia had taught him that informing was the lowest act a man could commit. A murderer might still be respected. An extortionist could still be honorable. A thief could still sit at the table. But a witness? Suddenly, the criminal fraternity discovered ethics. The word rat served an important purpose inside organized crime. It reduced a complicated human decision to a single act of disgust. It prevented members from asking why people cooperated, why leadership abandoned them, why loyalty disappeared under pressure, why men who preached honor regularly stole from, lied to, and plotted against one another. Calling somebody a rat ended the discussion. No analysis required. Very convenient for management. DiLeonardo had spent years accepting that language. Now it would be used against him. The decision to cooperate likely involved several motives at once. He wanted to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison. He felt betrayed by the Gambino administration. He wanted to protect what remained of his relationship with his family. He was angry, afraid, humiliated, and increasingly convinced that dying in prison for the men who shelved him would not restore his honor. It would merely make him another forgotten inmate while the organization replaced him before dinner. Self-preservation was part of the decision. That should not be disguised. DiLeonardo was facing devastating charges. Cooperation offered the possibility of a reduced sentence. He did not enter the government's offices because he suddenly developed a lifelong passion for federal prosecution. He was trying to survive. But survival and truth are not always opposites. A witness may cooperate for selfish reasons and still provide accurate, valuable information. Human motivation is rarely a clean glass of water. It is more like the sink behind a social club. Everything is mixed together and nobody wants to inspect it too closely. DiLeonardo's sense of betrayal also allowed him to reinterpret the Mafia oath. From his perspective, the Gambino family had broken the agreement first. He had remained silent during previous prosecutions. He had earned money, accepted risk, protected relationships, and followed the hierarchy. When he became vulnerable, the organization accused him, withdrew support, and removed his status. That sequence gave him a psychological defense. He was not betraying a loyal family. He was responding to a family that had already betrayed him. This reasoning did not erase the oath. It changed who he believed had violated it first. That distinction became essential. People usually resist seeing themselves as the original betrayer. They construct a story in which their actions are responses. The marriage was already broken. The friendship had already ended. The organization had already abandoned them. Sometimes that account is accurate. Sometimes it is self-protection. Often it is both. For DiLeonardo, the betrayal narrative made cooperation emotionally possible. Without it, he would have needed to accept that he had simply abandoned the code to save himself. With it, he could argue that the code no longer applied because the other side had already destroyed the relationship. The government now required him to do something the Mafia had trained him never to do. Speak plainly. No coded language. No carefully edited memories. No pretending a meeting was merely social. No claiming that envelopes contained birthday cards for men whose birthdays occurred 12 times a year. Cooperation began with debriefings. DiLeonardo had to describe his own crimes. Not merely the crimes of men he disliked. His crimes. His relationships. His role in the organization. His participation in conspiracies. His knowledge of violence. The process demanded confession before credibility. Federal prosecutors needed to know the full extent of his conduct because hidden information could later destroy him on the witness stand. If defense attorneys discovered a lie prosecutors had missed, his usefulness could evaporate. A cooperating witness is valuable only while the government believes it understands what the witness has done. That created a new version of the Mafia's loyalty test. The old organization demanded silence. The new arrangement demanded disclosure. The Gambino family required him to protect secrets. The government required him to surrender every one of them. DiLeonardo moved from one system of control into another. The difference was that the federal government put the agreement on paper. Over the course of repeated meetings, investigators could test his information. Names were checked. Dates compared. Relationships mapped. Claims measured against recordings, financial records, surveillance, court documents, and information provided by other witnesses. DiLeonardo's memory became evidence. His criminal history became expertise. His years inside the Gambino family became a government resource. This was the great reversal. The Mafia had promoted him because he knew how to maintain the organization. Now prosecutors valued him because he knew how to dismantle it. Every secret entrusted to Mikey Scars became potential testimony from Michael DiLeonardo. The organization had spent decades teaching him. Who reported to whom? How members were inducted? How disputes were settled? how orders traveled, how money moved, how murder could be discussed without using the word murder. It had created a walking institutional archive. Then it shelved him and left the archive sitting in federal custody with nothing but time and anger. Brilliant strategy. Absolutely first-rate personnel management. Cooperation also required DiLeonardo to confront the emotional consequences of naming former friends. These were not distant figures from an organizational chart. Use them to rebuild a future. Use them against the men who had discarded him. The Mafia called that betrayal. The government called it substantial assistance. DiLeonardo probably experienced it as both. He was no longer protecting the Gambino family. But he had not yet escaped it. Its rules still lived inside him. Its friendships still hurt. Its judgment still carried weight. Cooperation opened the door to freedom. It also guaranteed that the old life could never take him back. Michael DiLeonardo had chosen survival. To earn it, he would now have to sit beneath courtroom lights, face the men he once called brothers, and explain exactly how their sacred family conducted its business. The oath of silence was broken. The testimony was about to begin. Learning to become a government witness. Cooperation was not a single confession. It was a process. Long meetings. Repeated questions. Names, dates, businesses, murders, ceremonies, conversations, and relationships pulled apart one piece at a time. Michael DiLeonardo had spent decades learning how not to speak. Now, federal investigators wanted everything. Not the polished version. Not the street version. Not the version designed to protect old friends or preserve his reputation. Everything. For a man raised inside Omerta, that required more than remembering. It required learning an entirely new way to exist. Inside the Mafia, language was deliberately vague. Orders were softened. Crimes were disguised. Men did not always say exactly what they meant because saying exactly what they meant could someday be played for a jury. A murder might become that thing. A payment might become the package. A victim might become the problem. Nobody needed subtitles inside the life. Everyone understood. The system depended on shared context and selective amnesia. Federal prosecutors were not interested in selective amnesia. They wanted specifics. Who was present? Where were they standing? What words were used? Who gave the order? Who benefited? Who carried the message? Who received the money? And how did DiLeonardo know? The phrase "everybody knew" was not enough. Courtrooms prefer details. Very inconsiderate. DiLeonardo participated in extensive debriefing sessions with prosecutors and investigators. These sessions were designed to test both his knowledge and his honesty. A cooperating witness could not simply walk into a government office, accuse every enemy he ever had, and receive a complimentary release date. His claims had to be compared against evidence. Wiretaps, surveillance, financial records, telephone logs, other witnesses, prior statements, court documents. The government already knew portions of the story. The question was whether DiLeonardo's account matched the facts they could verify. This was crucial because his entire usefulness depended on credibility. He was a confessed criminal, a liar by profession, a man who had spent years concealing illegal conduct. Defense attorneys would remind juries of that repeatedly. Then they would remind them again. Then, just in case anyone had briefly forgotten, they would remind them during closing arguments. DiLeonardo, therefore, needed to become a reliable narrator of an unreliable life. That is the central contradiction of the cooperating witness. The government values him because he lived inside deception. The jury is then asked to believe him despite the deception. It is not an ideal arrangement. But organized crime bosses rarely invite neutral historians to planning meetings. The people with the best information are often the people with the worst resumes. DiLeonardo had one major advantage. He understood the Gambino family from the inside. He could explain hierarchy in practical terms. A boss was not merely a title. An underboss was not merely second in command. A captain did not simply supervise a list of employees. The organization operated through relationships, permissions, money, reputation, and fear. A chart could show who reported to whom. DiLeonardo could explain who actually held influence. That distinction mattered. Formal rank and real power were not always identical. Some men held titles, others controlled money, some were respected, others were tolerated because they had powerful relatives. A few possessed the rare mafia skill of being incompetent while remaining extremely well connected. Organized crime had nepotism too. It simply handled performance reviews more aggressively. DiLeonardo could also explain ceremonies and coded language. To an outsider, a meeting between several men in a restaurant might appear social. To an insider, the seating arrangement, introductions, and topics could reveal rank and purpose. A phrase that sounded meaningless to a juror might carry a clear instruction to a made member. This interpretive role made DiLeonardo valuable. He did not merely provide facts. He translated the culture. He could identify which men were formally inducted members and which were associates. He could explain who belonged to which crew. He could describe how money moved upward through the family. He could identify disputes, alliances, and rivalries that investigators had observed without fully understanding. He could also describe his own rise. That personal history gave prosecutors a narrative through which juries could understand the organization, the neighborhood, the social clubs, the induction, the rank, the rackets, the orders, the betrayal, the cooperation. A witness who can tell a coherent story is more powerful than a witness who supplies disconnected names. DiLeonardo knew the whole production, including the backstage arguments and the actors who believed they deserved top billing. But becoming a witness required more than knowledge. It required discipline. During testimony, DiLeonardo would face experienced defense attorneys whose job was to expose inconsistencies, selfish motives, forgotten details, and outright lies. They would ask about his crimes, his plea agreement, his hopes for leniency, his betrayals, his prior statements. Every advantage he expected to receive from the government would be presented as a reason not to trust him. And fairly so. A cooperating witness has an incentive to please prosecutors. That incentive does not automatically make his testimony false. But jurors must consider it. The prosecution, therefore, needed corroboration wherever possible. A recording matching DiLeonardo's account, a financial record supporting a payment, another witness confirming a meeting, a document proving a business relationship. His testimony was strongest when it explained evidence that already existed. The government did not want a storyteller performing mafia folklore. It wanted an insider whose account connected the pieces. DiLeonardo also had to accept that the government would control the use of his information. He might disclose dozens of crimes, but prosecutors would decide which cases to bring. He might describe former friends, enemies, and associates, but not every person would be charged. He might believe one event was significant while investigators focused on another. Inside the Gambino family, DiLeonardo had held rank. Inside the cooperation process, he was a source. A highly valuable source, but still a source. The transition required humility, or at least the appearance of it. The government did not need Mikey Scars giving orders. It needed Michael DiLeonardo answering questions. This also meant surrendering control over his public identity. Once he testified, defense attorneys and newspapers would describe him according to their own needs. Former Gambino captain, admitted murderer, government informant, turncoat, star witness, rat. Each label contained part of the story. None contained the whole man. But DiLeonardo had spent years benefiting from a fearsome public identity. Now he would experience the other side of branding. The nickname Mikey Scars no longer suggested power. It suggested betrayal. Inside the mafia, that transformation was permanent. There would be no apology tour, no reinstatement ceremony, no quiet return to the social club after everyone calmed down. Once DiLeonardo began providing information, the old world was closed. This finality may have strengthened his cooperation. There was no longer a safe middle ground. He could not tell half the truth and hope to preserve old friendships. Partial cooperation would satisfy nobody. The government would view him as dishonest. The mafia would still view him as a traitor. Once he crossed the line, survival depended on becoming useful. Extremely useful. And DiLeonardo had decades of information. He described criminal activity across multiple eras of the Gambino family. He discussed men who were dead, imprisoned, active, or under investigation. He could connect the Gotti years to the organization that followed. He understood both old-fashioned street rackets and newer financial schemes. He knew where traditions ended and business interests began. Usually, the answer was that tradition ended wherever money appeared. The debriefings gradually transformed private memory into prosecutorial material. Stories became reports. Relationships became diagrams. Conversations became potential testimony. People DiLeonardo once introduced as friends became subjects of investigation. The criminal life was being converted into evidence, one interview at a time. That transformation carried psychological consequences. Every disclosure made his return impossible. Every name widened the distance between him and his former identity. Every meeting with prosecutors reinforced the reality that Mikey Scars was now working against the world that created him. But it also gave him a new purpose. In custody, he had felt powerless. Cooperation restored a measure of control. His future was no longer determined solely by the indictment. His knowledge had value. His memory could influence prosecutions. His testimony could affect sentences, trials, and plea agreements. For years, the mafia had controlled him through secrets. Now the secrets gave him leverage. This did not make him innocent. It made him dangerous in a new direction. The Gambino family had once trusted Michael DiLeonardo because he understood how the organization worked. Federal prosecutors trusted him for precisely the same reason. The difference was that the mafia expected silence. The government handed him a microphone. And after decades of learning when not to speak, Mikey Scars was preparing to tell a jury everything. Testifying against John Gotti Jr. Michael DiLeonardo had spent years standing beside John Gotti Jr. Now he would sit across a courtroom and testify against him. This was not simply another assignment from prosecutors. It was the most personal stage of his cooperation. Junior Gotti had been more than a figure in the Gambino hierarchy. He was DiLeonardo's friend, a man he loved, a man whose child DiLeonardo had reportedly served as godfather to. Their relationship had been built through family gatherings, criminal business, private conversations, shared loyalties, and the belief that their bond would survive anything. Federal court was about to test that theory. Prosecutors accused John Gotti Jr. of participating in racketeering activity tied to the Gambino crime family. Among the most serious allegations was his supposed role in the 1992 kidnapping and shooting of radio host Curtis Sliwa. Sliwa had repeatedly criticized John Gotti Sr. on the air. According to the government's theory, members of the Gambino family decided that public criticism required a response. Not a rebuttal. Not a sternly worded letter. A kidnapping. Because nothing demonstrates confidence quite like shooting a radio host for hurting the boss's feelings. Sliwa was picked up in what he believed was a taxi. He was then attacked and shot. He survived. The government later argued that the assault had been ordered as retaliation for his public comments about the Gotti family. DiLeonardo's testimony helped prosecutors explain the organization surrounding the alleged plot. He could describe the Gambino hierarchy, the relationships among the men involved, the way orders and permissions moved through the family, the meaning of conversations that sounded vague to outsiders, and the position Junior Gotti occupied inside the organization. But a witness like DiLeonardo came with obvious baggage. He had admitted to serious crimes. He expected sentencing consideration. He had broken his mafia oath. He had powerful reasons to please the government. Defense attorneys attacked those weaknesses directly. They portrayed him as a desperate criminal attempting to save himself by giving prosecutors the testimony they wanted. That argument was predictable. It was also legitimate. A jury should question a witness who receives benefits for cooperation. The question was not whether DiLeonardo had motives. He clearly did. The question was whether those motives made his testimony false. The prosecution attempted to support his account through other evidence and witnesses. The defense emphasized uncertainty, contradictions, and the danger of trusting a man whose career had depended upon deception. The courtroom became a battle between two versions of DiLeonardo. To the government, he was an insider finally telling the truth. To the defense, he was a liar who had simply changed clients. Both descriptions had enough truth to make the situation uncomfortable. DiLeonardo's emotional attachment to Junior Gotti made his testimony especially revealing. He did not present himself as a man taking pleasure in destroying an enemy. He spoke about affection, loyalty, and the pain of testifying against someone he had considered a brother. That pain complicated the popular image of the informant. The mafia prefers a simple story. A coward gets scared. He turns on his friends. He lies for leniency. Case closed. But DiLeonardo's behavior suggested something more tangled. He could love Junior Gotti and still testify against him. He could believe their friendship had been real, while also believing the organization had betrayed him. He could grieve the relationship while participating in its destruction. Human loyalty does not switch off cleanly. It frays, splits, contradicts itself. A man may act against someone and still miss him. He may tell the truth about a friend and still wish the truth were different. That emotional contradiction did not prove DiLeonardo's testimony, but it revealed the psychological cost of giving it. Junior Gotti's defense also benefited from a larger problem facing prosecutors. By the time of the trials, Gotti argued that he had withdrawn from organized crime. Withdrawal mattered because racketeering charges depended partly on whether he remained connected to the criminal enterprise during the relevant period. The government argued that his relationships and conduct showed continued participation. The defense insisted he had left the life behind. This created another strange courtroom spectacle. A man born into the Gotti dynasty argued that he had resigned from the mafia. Apparently, the organization that threatened death for leaving also accepted career transitions when useful to the defense. The trials did not produce a final conviction against Gotti on the charged racketeering allegations. Multiple juries were unable to reach unanimous verdicts. The cases ended in mistrials. That outcome did not necessarily mean jurors believed Gotti was innocent. It meant the prosecution failed to persuade every juror beyond a reasonable doubt. The distinction is important. Courtrooms do not deliver historical certainty. They deliver legal outcomes under specific rules. A witness may be credible on some points and doubted on others. Evidence may appear powerful yet remain insufficient. One juror's reasonable doubt can stop an entire prosecution. For DiLeonardo, the mistrials created an awkward reality. He had publicly broken with the Gambino family, testified against a man he loved, exposed private relationships, accepted the label of informant, and still failed to produce the conviction prosecutors wanted. Cooperation is not a vending machine. Insert betrayal. Receive guilty verdict. The witness can do everything demanded of him and still watch the jury deadlock. But DiLeonardo's usefulness did not depend on a single trial. His testimony helped prosecutors understand the Gambino family across numerous cases. He could be used to establish patterns, structures, relationships, and criminal history even when a particular jury remained unconvinced. The trials also showed why mafia prosecutions depend so heavily on insiders. Criminal organizations do not issue meeting minutes. Murder orders are not emailed with helpful subject lines. The government must reconstruct intent from coded conversations, witness testimony, financial records, surveillance, and relationships. An insider can explain what the evidence means, But the insider's criminal past gives the defense a weapon. The prosecution needs the criminal because he knows the truth. The defense attacks him because he is a criminal. Everybody is correct. Welcome to federal court. DiLeonardo's testimony against Junior Gotti marked the final destruction of his old identity. Before that moment, cooperation had largely occurred in private rooms with investigators. Now the betrayal was public. His former friends could hear his words. The press could report them. The Mafia could no longer pretend he might return. Mikey Scars had crossed the courtroom point of no return. The oath had been broken. The friendship had been exposed. And the man he once protected was now seated at the defense table. For prosecutors, DiLeonardo was a witness. For the Gambino family, he was a traitor. For DiLeonardo himself, the experience appeared more painful than either label could capture. He had survived the life by becoming useful to the government. But survival had demanded that he destroy the relationships that once made the life worth living. That was the real price of cooperation. Not merely losing status. Not merely entering witness protection. It was standing before strangers, pointing toward someone you once called family, and explaining why the word family had become evidence. The problem with Mafia honor. To the Mafia, Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation settled the question of his character. He had talked. Therefore, he had no honor. Simple, convenient, and completely backward. The Mafia's definition of honor has always required a remarkable amount of selective blindness. A man could extort business owners, cheat investors, run illegal gambling operations, participate in murder conspiracies, threaten witnesses, destroy families, and still be described as honorable, provided he kept his mouth shut afterward. But the moment he spoke to law enforcement, everybody clutched their pearls. Apparently, violence was understandable. Truth was where they drew the line. That contradiction reveals what Mafia honor actually protected. Not morality. Not the neighborhood. Not family values. The organization. Its money. Its leadership. Its secrets. The code of silence was not a noble ethical system. It was an insurance policy for criminals. A member who harmed innocent people could still be useful. A member who testified became dangerous. That was the real distinction. The Mafia dressed this arrangement in language about tradition, courage, and brotherhood, because protecting the racketeering conspiracy lacked poetry. DiLeonardo had sworn an oath. That fact mattered. He entered the organization willingly and accepted its rules. He benefited from its power and status. When he cooperated, he betrayed men who had trusted him with serious secrets. There is no reason to pretend otherwise. But an oath does not become honorable merely because keeping it requires sacrifice. A promise to protect murderers remains a promise to protect murderers. Loyalty can be admirable. It can also become a shield placed over corruption. The moral value depends upon what receives the loyalty. A firefighter loyal to his crew may risk his life to save strangers. A criminal loyal to his crew may intimidate those strangers into silence. Same word. Very different pension plan. DiLeonardo's critics often frame the situation as a contest between loyalty and cowardice. He remained loyal while life was comfortable. Then, when prison became likely, he cooperated. There is truth in that accusation. Fear of punishment clearly influenced his decision. But the criticism becomes selective when it ignores how often mafia loyalty itself depended on self-interest. Members remained silent because they feared retaliation, because they expected financial support, because their families might be protected, because they hoped the organization would reward them later. That is not pure devotion. It is an exchange. The mafia called it loyalty because mutually beneficial criminal arrangement maintained through fear was difficult to fit on a saint card. When the Gambino administration shelved DiLeonardo, the exchange collapsed. From his perspective, he had fulfilled his side. He had earned, obeyed, accepted risk, kept secrets, survived prosecution. Then, when he became costly, the organization cut him loose. The family demanded permanent loyalty while offering temporary protection. That is not brotherhood. It is a contract where only one party is allowed to read the fine print. DiLeonardo's cooperation exposed the weakness beneath the mafia code. If loyalty were truly sacred, leaders would practice it towards subordinates. They would support imprisoned members consistently, protect families without calculating financial value, refuse to murder one another during internal disputes, avoid stealing from their own crews, and honor their promises even when doing so became inconvenient. They did not. Mafia history is filled with bosses killing subordinates, allies betraying allies, captains hiding income, members switching factions, and entire administrations treating friendship as a temporary business condition. Yet cooperation with law enforcement was described as the act that introduced betrayal into the life. It did not. Betrayal was already living there. It had a seat at the table. It collected envelopes on Thursdays. The difference was that internal betrayal usually benefited the organization or one of its leaders. Government cooperation threatened them all. So one became politics. The other became unforgivable. This is why the word rat carries so much force. It replaces moral analysis with disgust. Once a person is labeled a rat, nobody needs to examine what he exposed. The murders, the extortion, the corruption, the abandonment. The label directs attention away from the crime and toward the person who revealed it. It asks the public to judge the witness more harshly than the conduct he described. A lovely piece of psychological housekeeping. DiLeonardo certainly deserved judgment. He admitted serious criminal conduct. His later testimony did not erase the people harmed while he served the Gambino family. Cooperation was not a baptism. A plea agreement is not holy water. But the mafia's condemnation cannot be accepted as a meaningful moral verdict. The organization was not angry because DiLeonardo became unethical. It was angry because he became useful to somebody else. That is the true offense. He transferred his loyalty. Inside the Gambino family, he used knowledge to protect criminal power. As a witness, he used the same knowledge to help prosecute it. The information did not change. The beneficiary did. There is also a deeper psychological reason organized crime treats informants with such hatred. A cooperating member does more than expose crimes. He exposes the mythology. He confirms that made men can become frightened, that brotherhood can collapse, that sacred vows can be negotiated, that powerful bosses depend on ordinary men remaining silent. The informant reveals that the institution is not invincible. It is a collection of human beings held together by fear, profit, identity, and the assumption that everybody else will keep pretending. One witness can shatter that assumption. DiLeonardo's testimony showed that the Mafia's strongest walls were built from belief. Members believed silence would protect them. They believed cooperation meant death or eternal shame. They believed the organization would care for them. They believed loyalty moved in both directions. Once those beliefs failed, the structure became vulnerable. The greatest threat was not federal law alone. It was disillusionment. A member who no longer believed in the family could explain everything. That made DiLeonardo dangerous in a way guns never could. He knew the ceremonies were theater. He knew the friendships could be conditional. He knew the code was flexible when leadership benefited. And he knew that the men preaching silence often depended upon frightened defendants, sacrificing their own lives. The Mafia called him dishonorable for exposing that reality. But honor cannot be measured solely by whether a man keeps a promise. It must also consider what the promise protects. DiLeonardo broke his oath. He also helped expose an organization built on exploitation and violence. Both facts are true. He betrayed his criminal associates. They had already betrayed their own supposed principles. Also true. That does not make him a hero. It makes the moral landscape more complicated than the Mafia would prefer. And complexity is dangerous to mythology. The legend requires clean categories. Loyal man. Rat. Brother. Traitor. Soldier. Coward. But Michael DiLeonardo occupied several categories at once. He was loyal until loyalty became unbearable. He was betrayed and became a betrayer. He acted to save himself and helped prosecute dangerous criminals. He broke a promise that should never have been romanticized in the first place. The Mafia called its code honor. The code protected extortionists, killers, and corrupt leaders from accountability. That was not honor. That was silence with a public relations department. Victim, perpetrator, or both. Michael DiLeonardo's story creates an uncomfortable temptation. Once viewers hear about his rejection by the Gambino family, his emotional collapse, and the pressure surrounding his cooperation, it becomes easy to recast him entirely as a victim. That would be dishonest. DiLeonardo was not an innocent man who wandered into the Mafia by accident and spent 30 years politely asking where the exit was. He became a made member. He rose to captain. He supervised associates. He benefited from criminal authority. He admitted involvement in racketeering, extortion, fraud, loan sharking, gambling operations, and murder conspiracies. He helped maintain the very system that eventually turned against him. That matters. His suffering does not erase the suffering he helped create. A man can be betrayed without being innocent. He can be emotionally manipulated without losing responsibility for his choices. He can experience real pain while having caused real pain to others. Those truths do not cancel one another. They sit together awkwardly because morality rarely arranges itself into clean little courthouse folders. DiLeonardo was both a participant in the mafia's culture and a product of it. From a young age, he absorbed a distorted system of values. Fear became respect. Violence became discipline. Silence became honor. Criminal success became proof of manhood. Those beliefs did not remove his ability to choose, but they shaped the choices that felt available and meaningful to him. This is how destructive institutions reproduce themselves. They do not recruit people by announcing the complete cost on the first day. Nobody hands the young associate a brochure reading, "Welcome. Benefits include temporary status, permanent legal exposure, conditional friendship, and the possibility that your closest companions will eventually testify against you." The institution offers belonging first. Responsibility arrives later. By the time the true price becomes visible, the member may already have built his entire identity around paying it. Understanding that process is not the same as excusing it. Explanation and forgiveness are not identical. A doctor can explain how poison spreads without declaring the poison innocent. In the same way, examining how DiLeonardo became deeply invested in organized crime does not absolve him of the damage he caused. It helps explain how ordinary human needs can be redirected toward extraordinary harm. The need for belonging, status, protection, recognition, brotherhood, purpose. None of those desires is inherently criminal. But inside the mafia, they were attached to obedience, secrecy, and violence. DiLeonardo found meaning through the organization. Then he helped make that organization meaningful to others. As a captain, he was no longer merely the impressionable young man watching older mobsters. He became one of the older mobsters. Younger associates could now look at him and see the same illusion he once saw. The money, the authority, the nickname, the access, the sense that important people respected him. He became part of the recruitment advertisement. No billboard required. His lifestyle carried the message. That creates a cycle of responsibility. The institution shaped him. Then he helped shape the next generation. The victim became an enforcer of the system that victimized him. This pattern appears in many abusive organizations. People who suffer under a hierarchy may later defend it, enforce it, and repeat its cruelty once they gain status. They tell themselves the suffering created discipline, that the humiliation built character, that everyone must endure the same treatment to prove worthiness. Pain becomes tradition, and tradition becomes an excuse to pass the pain forward. DiLeonardo remained loyal while the system harmed outsiders. The businesses being extorted, the investors being cheated, the people living beneath the threat of violence, the families damaged by organized crime. Their suffering did not cause him to reject the organization. His faith cracked when the organization harmed him. That is not unusual. People often recognize corruption most clearly when they become its target. Before then, the corruption may look like policy, culture, business, the way things have always been done. Once the machinery turns toward them, they finally hear how loud it is. DiLeonardo's shelving became a revelation because it made the Mafia's conditional loyalty personal. He discovered that rank did not guarantee protection, history did not guarantee gratitude, friendship did not guarantee support. And decades of service did not prevent leadership from treating him as disposable. But the civilians harmed by the organization had understood its cruelty long before he did. They simply lacked the privilege of calling it betrayal. To them, it had always been crime. This distinction is essential when analyzing his later cooperation. DiLeonardo's decision to help the government may have produced genuine public benefit. His testimony assisted prosecutions. His knowledge helped expose criminal structures. His cooperation may have prevented additional crimes. Those outcomes deserve recognition, but good consequences do not retroactively purify every motive. He cooperated under pressure. He wanted leniency. He felt abandoned. He was trying to save his future. Again, none of that automatically invalidates his testimony. Self-interest and truth can occupy the same sentence. But it complicates any attempt to present him as a transformed hero marching nobly toward justice. He did not wake one morning, gaze across Brooklyn, and decide constitutional law had always been his true calling. The government offered survival. He had information. The exchange began there. What happened afterward may have involved remorse, reflection, anger, and genuine disillusionment. Human motives evolve. A decision made initially from fear can later produce honest self-examination. A person may begin cooperating to save himself and eventually confront the harm he helped cause. The origin of change does not automatically determine its depth, but neither should later reflection erase the original calculation. DiLeonardo's story is compelling precisely because it refuses simple moral casting. He was not merely the villain. He was not merely the victim. He was not merely the redeemed witness. He occupied all three roles at different times, sometimes simultaneously. He was harmed by a culture he willingly enforced. He betrayed men who had betrayed him. He helped prosecute criminals after spending decades among them. He exposed a mythology he once helped sell. That complexity makes people uncomfortable because audiences prefer verdicts. Good man, bad man, hero, rat, victim, monster. Pick a box and close the lid. But a serious analysis cannot do that. DiLeonardo's humanity does not excuse his crimes. His crimes do not erase his humanity. That is the difficult balance. It is easy to condemn a caricature. It is harder to examine a person capable of loyalty and betrayal, cruelty and affection, self-preservation and public usefulness. Yet that is where the real lesson lives. Evil does not always arrive as pure malice. Sometimes it grows through belonging. Rationalization, ambition, obedience, and the repeated decision to treat another person's suffering as the cost of doing business. DiLeonardo did not need to believe he was evil. He only needed to believe the family's interests mattered more than the people harmed along the way. Then, when the family discarded him, the moral system collapsed because its benefits were gone. That collapse eventually helped law enforcement. But it came after years of participation. Michael DiLeonardo was victimized by the Gambino crime family. He was also one of the men who gave the Gambino crime family its power. The psychology of betrayal. Why did being shelved affect Michael DiLeonardo so deeply? Because the Gambino family did not merely reject his services. It rejected his identity. For decades, DiLeonardo had built his understanding of himself around several beliefs. He was loyal. He was respected. He belonged. His sacrifices had meaning. His position had been earned, and the men he called brothers would stand beside him when the consequences finally arrived. Then the consequences arrived. The brothers disappeared. That kind of betrayal is more psychologically destructive than an ordinary dispute because it forces a person to reconsider his entire history. If the organization was not loyal, then what had his loyalty been for? If the friendships were conditional, then how many of them had been real? If his rank could vanish while he sat in custody, then had the rank ever represented respect? Or had it represented usefulness? Those questions threatened the story DiLeonardo had told himself for most of his life. People need their sacrifices to mean something. We need to believe the years, risks, losses, and compromises led toward a purpose. Otherwise, the past begins looking less like devotion and more like wasted time wearing an expensive suit. DiLeonardo had surrendered enormous parts of his life to the Gambino family. He had accepted criminal exposure, obeyed superiors, participated in violence, protected secrets, and tolerated personal pain in the name of loyalty. The more he sacrificed, the more psychologically necessary it became to believe the institution deserved it. That belief reduced conflict inside his mind. He was not simply committing crimes. He was serving a family. He was not merely obeying criminals. He was honoring tradition. He was not endangering his future. He was proving his character. Then the organization shelved him. With one decision, the Gambino administration threatened every rationalization that had made the life emotionally sustainable. If the family could discard him, perhaps it had never been a family. Perhaps the oath was not sacred. Perhaps loyalty had been less a virtue than a tool used by leadership to manage frightened men. That realization creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Two opposing beliefs collide. DiLeonardo believed the Mafia valued loyalty. The Mafia demonstrated that its loyalty to him was conditional. Both ideas could not comfortably remain true. Something had to change. He could blame himself. He could accept the accusations against him and decide he had somehow failed the family. Or he could blame the organization. He could conclude that the men above him had violated the code first. That second interpretation gave him a path toward cooperation. If the family had betrayed him, then speaking to the government could be reframed as retaliation, survival, or release from an agreement that no longer existed. This did not eliminate guilt, but it redistributed it. DiLeonardo no longer had to view himself as the sole betrayer. He could place the first act of betrayal on the Gambino administration. That story protected what remained of his self-image. And when a person's identity is collapsing, even a painful explanation can become a life raft. Betrayal also produces anger because it violates expectation. We are rarely shocked when an enemy harms us. That is what enemies are for. The damage becomes harder to absorb when it comes from people whose loyalty we trusted. DiLeonardo expected federal prosecutors to attack him. They had never pretended otherwise. The government called him a criminal, charged him publicly, and threatened him with prison. There was clarity in that hostility. The Mafia's hostility was different. These were men who had called him brother, shared ceremonies with him, accepted his money, used his loyalty, then withdrew support when he needed it most. The government had treated him like an enemy. The Mafia had treated him like property reaching the end of its useful life. That distinction helps explain why his anger became powerful enough to overcome decades of conditioning. Fear alone may lead a defendant to consider cooperation. Betrayal gives him someone to punish. Knowledge that once belonged to the group becomes a weapon against it. Secrets become leverage. Testimony becomes revenge dressed in legal clothing. Again, this does not mean DiLeonardo fabricated his account. Anger and accuracy can exist together, but betrayal likely intensified his willingness to disclose information. The more abandoned he felt, the less emotional reason remained to protect the men who abandoned him. There was also humiliation. Being shelved meant losing status in a culture obsessed with status. A captain was expected to command respect. Instead, DiLeonardo became a man other members were instructed to avoid. His authority evaporated while he was unable to defend himself in person. For someone whose identity depended heavily on reputation, this was devastating. Humiliation differs from guilt. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Humiliation says, "I have become worthless in the eyes of others." The first may encourage accountability. The second often produces rage, withdrawal, or revenge. DiLeonardo's response contained elements of all three. He withdrew psychologically. He experienced severe despair. Then he began helping prosecutors dismantle the institution that had stripped away his value. The cooperation restored something the shelving had taken: agency. Inside federal custody, DiLeonardo had little control. The government controlled his physical future. The mafia controlled his social identity. By deciding to cooperate, he made a choice that neither institution could fully reverse. The government needed his knowledge. The mafia feared it. For the first time since the indictment, DiLeonardo possessed something powerful enough to affect both sides. Information. The man who had been treated as disposable suddenly became indispensable. That reversal must have carried psychological force. The Gambino administration had decided he no longer mattered. Federal prosecutors responded by spending years asking him to explain the organization in detail. The mafia removed his rank. The government made his experience valuable. The family refused to hear his defense. Investigators recorded every word. It was not affection. It was not friendship. But it was recognition. And after rejection, recognition can feel remarkably close to rescue. This raises an uncomfortable point about informants. The government does not merely offer reduced punishment. It may also offer a new identity. The former mobster becomes a witness, a source, a participant in prosecutions, someone whose knowledge has public value. That role can replace the status lost inside the criminal organization. The loyalty changes direction, but the need to feel important may remain. DiLeonardo had once been important because he protected Gambino's secrets. Now he was important because he revealed them. Different institution. Same human need. To matter. The psychology of betrayal also explains why former members can become some of the strongest critics of organizations they once defended. Outsiders may criticize the mafia for years without affecting a devoted member. But once the member experiences betrayal personally, all the outsider criticisms acquire new meaning. The violence, the hypocrisy, the conditional friendships, the exploitation. Facts previously dismissed as propaganda become recognizable. Not because the facts changed, because the member's position changed. DiLeonardo had helped operate the system while believing he belonged near the top of it. Once the system cast him out, he could see the structure from the position of the people beneath it. He had not become morally innocent. He had become disillusioned. And disillusionment is dangerous to any institution built on mythology. A frightened member may remain silent. A disillusioned member begins explaining the trick. The Mafia's great mistake was assuming DiLeonardo's oath would remain stronger than his sense of betrayal. It expected him to protect the organization after the organization had erased him. It demanded loyalty without reciprocity, sacrifice without gratitude, silence without support. That arrangement may survive while the member still believes. Once belief disappears, all that remains is fear. And fear becomes less effective when the person already believes he has lost everything. Michael DiLeonardo did not begin cooperating because betrayal transformed him into a hero. It transformed him into a man who no longer saw a reason to die for the Gambino family. That was enough. The organization had spent decades teaching him that betrayal was unforgivable. Then it betrayed him and expected the lesson to apply only one way. That was not honor. That was arrogance. And arrogance, sooner or later, starts talking to the FBI. The psychology of cooperation. Cooperation gave Michael DiLeonardo something he had almost completely lost: control. By the time he began speaking with federal authorities, nearly every major part of his life was being controlled by someone else. The government controlled his physical freedom. The indictment controlled his future. The Gambino administration had taken his status. Former friends controlled the story being told about him on the street. And the Mafia Code controlled how he was expected to respond. Remain silent. Accept the consequences. Protect the organization. Perhaps spend the rest of his life in prison. And do it gracefully because apparently a life sentence becomes dignified when the people benefiting from your silence call it honor. Cooperation changed that balance. DiLeonardo could not erase the charges. He could not return to his former position. He could not repair every relationship. But he could decide what happened to the information inside his head. For decades, that knowledge had belonged to the Gambino family. The names, the ceremonies, the meetings, the criminal schemes, the internal disputes, the favors, the violence, the coded conversations. Those secrets had given the organization power over him. Once he cooperated, the secrets became his leverage. This was a dramatic psychological reversal. The shelved captain had been treated as irrelevant. The cooperating witness became essential. Investigators wanted his time, prosecutors wanted his memory, grand juries wanted his testimony, defense attorneys wanted to destroy his credibility. Suddenly, everyone agreed Michael DiLeonardo mattered, not because he still possessed mafia rank, because he possessed knowledge. That recognition may have helped reconstruct an identity shattered by rejection. He was no longer merely the abandoned captain sitting in a cell. He was a government witness capable of explaining an entire criminal system. The new identity did not erase the old one. It was built from it. The skills that once helped DiLeonardo survive inside organized crime became useful during cooperation. He understood hierarchy, read people carefully, remembered conversations, recognized coded language, and knew which details carried hidden importance. The Mafia had trained him to observe without speaking. The government asked him to observe and then never stop speaking, a modest change in company policy. Cooperation also allowed DiLeonardo to reinterpret his past. Before becoming a witness, his criminal history represented loyalty and achievement inside the mafia. After cooperation, the same history could be presented as expertise. He had not merely wasted decades inside a destructive institution. He could now use that experience to damage the institution. This kind of reframing can be psychologically powerful. Human beings struggle to accept meaningless suffering. We search for a story that turns pain into purpose. For DiLeonardo, cooperation offered that possibility. His years inside the Gambino family had caused harm and exposed him to imprisonment. But those same years now allowed him to help prosecutors understand and dismantle criminal operations. That did not undo the past, nothing could, but it allowed the past to produce something other than continued silence. The transformation also helped DiLeonardo separate himself from the identity of Mikey Scars. Mikey Scars had belonged to the street. Michael DiLeonardo could belong to the future, at least theoretically. In practice, the two identities remained fused. Every time he testified, prosecutors relied upon the credibility of Mikey Scars, the experienced Gambino captain. Every time the defense attacked him, it attacked Michael DiLeonardo as the admitted criminal seeking leniency. He needed the old identity to prove he possessed knowledge. Then he needed jurors to believe he had changed enough to tell the truth. Quite the balancing act. Believe me because I was deeply involved, but also believe me because I am no longer that person. Federal trials rarely offer comfortable character arcs. DiLeonardo's motives were almost certainly mixed. Fear of prison mattered. Anger at the Gambino administration mattered. The desire to protect his family mattered. The possibility of freedom mattered. Perhaps remorse mattered. Perhaps revenge did too. These motives do not need to compete for first place. Human decisions are rarely made by a single clean emotion sitting politely at the head of a conference table. Fear speaks, pride interrupts, anger throws a folder. Guilt stares at the carpet. Self-preservation quietly controls the budget. The result is still a decision. This complexity matters because both sides benefited from simplifying him. The mafia described him as a cowardly traitor. The government described him as a valuable cooperating witness. Neither description captured the entire man. He could be frightened and useful, self-interested and truthful, angry and remorseful, a betrayer and a person who had been betrayed. The psychological power of cooperation came partly from allowing those contradictions to coexist. He no longer had to pretend he was the fearless captain who would accept any sentence without complaint. That image had nearly destroyed him. He could admit fear, admit crimes, admit that the mafia had controlled him, admit that his loyalty had limits. Confession weakened the old performance. For years, DiLeonardo had been expected to appear strong by hiding vulnerability. The government needed him to reveal vulnerability because it explained motive. Why did he join? Why did he remain? Why did he cooperate? The answers required him to speak about humiliation, fear, friendship, and betrayal. Subjects the mafia typically handled by staring silently into an espresso until somebody changed the conversation. Cooperation may also have offered moral distance from his former life. Each testimony placed DiLeonardo physically and symbolically outside the organization. He sat with prosecutors, entered court through government arrangements, identified former associates, explained the meaning behind mafia customs. The family became an object of analysis rather than the center of his identity. This distance could support genuine reflection. Once a person begins describing a destructive system to outsiders, he may hear its contradictions more clearly. The ceremony sounds less sacred when explained in a federal courtroom. The code sounds less honorable when jurors hear which crimes it protected. The Brotherhood sounds less convincing when the witness describes how quickly members abandoned one another. Narration can create separation. By telling the story, DiLeonardo could begin standing outside it. But cooperation did not automatically produce redemption. A person can expose crimes without fully confronting his own responsibility. He can describe organizational evil while minimizing personal choices. He can emphasize betrayal by former friends because that story is easier than examining the people he harmed while the friendships were profitable. Every cooperating witness faces the temptation of becoming the hero of his own confession. The government may encourage a version of the story in which the witness's transformation appears complete. Defense attorneys encourage the opposite version, in which every word is manipulation. Reality usually lives in the unpleasant space between them. DiLeonardo provided extraordinary assistance. He also received extraordinary benefit. Those facts belong together. The arrangement was transactional. The government wanted convictions. DiLeonardo wanted freedom. But a transaction can still produce public good. Firefighters are paid. Doctors are paid. Witnesses may receive leniency. Motivation does not automatically invalidate outcome. The real question is whether the information was truthful, corroborated, and useful. Federal authorities repeatedly concluded that DiLeonardo's cooperation met that standard. Psychologically, the arrangement gave him a reason to continue living. Before cooperation, the future appeared closed. After cooperation, the future became conditional. Tell the truth. Remain useful. Testify when asked. Accept the consequences that remained. And perhaps leave prison alive. Conditional hope is still hope. For someone who had recently seen no future outside a cell, that possibility could become enormous. Cooperation did not simply reduce legal exposure. It created movement. Meetings. Preparation. Testimony. Purpose. A path, however uncertain, toward another identity. This may be one reason some informants become deeply committed to their new role. The work does not only save time, it saves narrative. The cooperating witness can tell himself that his life now serves a different purpose. That the knowledge once used to protect criminals is being used against them. That the past, though unforgivable, is no longer being defended. Whether DiLeonardo achieved full moral transformation is impossible to measure from the outside. There is no laboratory test for redemption. No blood panel for remorse. No federal form labeled, "Please rate your spiritual growth from 1 to 10. What can be measured are actions. He disclosed information, admitted serious wrongdoing, testified publicly, helped authorities pursue members of organized crime, and accepted permanent exile from the world that had defined him. Those actions carried consequences for his former associates, for victims, for his family, and for DiLeonardo himself. The Mafia portrayed cooperation as weakness because that interpretation protected the mythology. But cooperation required DiLeonardo to face threats the organization had spent decades making terrifying. Public shame, loss of friendship, possible retaliation, exposure of his own crimes, and the permanent destruction of his old identity. Fear motivated him. Courage may also have been required. Those statements are not mutually exclusive. Courage is not the absence of fear. Sometimes it is what a frightened person does once every safer option has already disappeared. Michael DiLeonardo cooperated to survive. He also transformed survival into testimony. The distinction matters. He could have offered minimal information, played games with prosecutors, hidden favored friends, or attempted to manipulate both sides. Instead, authorities came to regard his assistance as unusually extensive. The rejected captain had become one of the government's most important mafia witnesses. Not because cooperation made him pure, because it made him useful in a new direction. For years, Mikey Scars had used fear, secrecy, and loyalty to protect the Gambino family. Now Michael DiLeonardo used memory, disclosure, and betrayal to help dismantle it. Same man. Same history. Different employer. And this one at least offered the possibility of parole. The government's useful sinner. The federal government did not need Michael DiLeonardo to be innocent. In fact, his value depended on the opposite. He knew the Gambino crime family because he had lived inside it. He understood extortion because he had participated in criminal operations. He understood hierarchy because he had held rank. He understood murder conspiracies because he had been close enough to the machinery to explain how decisions became bodies. The government was not purchasing moral purity. It was purchasing access. And Michael DiLeonardo had decades of it. This creates one of the ugliest compromises in organized crime prosecutions. The people most capable of exposing a criminal organization are often the people who helped make it powerful. A low-level associate may know one gambling operation. A driver may know one meeting. A bookmaker may know one crew. But a captain can explain the architecture. Who answered to whom? Which leaders possessed real authority? Which businesses supplied money? Which friendships concealed criminal alliances? Which orders were spoken directly and which were understood without explanation? That knowledge is rare. It is also expensive. The price is usually leniency. DiLeonardo pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with federal authorities. In return, prosecutors could later ask a judge to consider the value of his assistance when imposing sentence. This was not a promise of freedom. It was a possibility. The government would measure his cooperation by its truthfulness, completeness, usefulness, and the risks he accepted by testifying. That arrangement gave prosecutors enormous influence over his future. If they believed he lied, concealed information, or refused to testify, his deal could collapse. The Gambino family had once controlled him through secrecy. The government now controlled him through disclosure. One organization demanded silence under threat of death. The other demanded truth under threat of prison. A refreshing change in management style. DiLeonardo's cooperation reportedly extended across numerous investigations and prosecutions. He testified about Gambino family operations, internal ceremonies, criminal relationships, and the conduct of former associates. He helped juries understand a world deliberately designed to confuse outsiders. To federal investigators, he was not merely another witness. He was an interpreter, a guide through the coded language and shifting loyalties of La Cosa Nostra. His usefulness also extended beyond a single defendant. A cooperating captain can help authorities confirm old information, develop new leads, identify unknown participants, and evaluate other witnesses. One detail may revive a dormant investigation. One name may connect separate criminal schemes. One remembered conversation may explain why an apparently ordinary meeting mattered. This is why prosecutors sometimes reward highly culpable defendants more generously than lower-level criminals. The higher-ranking offender knows more. That may feel morally backward. Sometimes it is. A minor participant with little useful information can receive years in prison. A captain who admits far more serious wrongdoing may receive substantial leniency because he can help convict others. Justice becomes entangled with utility. The courtroom asks not only, "What did this man do?" It also asks, "What can this man give us?" DiLeonardo gave prosecutors a great deal. Authorities later described his cooperation as unusually valuable. His testimony contributed to cases involving organized crime figures across multiple investigations. Contemporary accounts credited his assistance with helping secure scores of convictions and recover significant amounts of money. The exact numbers varied depending on how related cases and pleas were counted. But the broader point remained clear. He had become a productive government witness. The mafia spent years praising him as a good earner. The federal government discovered he could earn in convictions too. This arrangement invited criticism. DiLeonardo had admitted involvement in serious crimes. He had participated in a violent criminal culture. He stood to benefit personally by helping prosecutors. Every time he testified, defense attorneys could ask the same question. Was he telling the truth? Or was he telling the government whatever might reduce his sentence? That question could never be eliminated. It could only be managed through corroboration. Prosecutors compared his accounts with recordings, records, surveillance, prior testimony, and other witnesses. When his information matched evidence unknown to him, his credibility increased. When details conflicted, defense attorneys attacked. This is how cooperating testimony is supposed to be tested. Not through blind faith. Not through mafia mythology. Evidence. The government also had to confront the unpleasant reality that DiLeonardo's criminal history was the reason it needed him. A witness with a clean record would be easier to trust. He would also know absolutely nothing about secret Gambino ceremonies or murder conspiracies. The prosecution could not call the neighborhood librarian to explain mob hierarchy. The librarian had made healthier career choices. DiLeonardo's role, therefore, exposed the practical limits of moral purity in law enforcement. To prosecute secretive criminal organizations, authorities often rely on compromised people. Informants. Cooperators. Defendants seeking reduced sentences. Associates angry over money. Members abandoned by leadership. The government uses fractures already present inside the criminal world. It does not create the betrayal. It formalizes it. Offers paperwork. Adds prosecutors. And turns private resentment into sworn testimony. That process can produce justice. It can also produce risk. A desperate witness may exaggerate. A resentful witness may distort. A calculating witness may tell partial truths. That is why no serious prosecution should rest solely on charisma and a dramatic nickname. The witness must be checked, tested, challenged, and supported by independent evidence whenever possible. DiLeonardo's value survived those tests often enough for prosecutors to use him repeatedly. That did not transform him into a saint. It transformed him into a credible resource. There is a difference. Saints are honored for virtue. Resources are valued for usefulness. The federal government did not forgive DiLeonardo in a spiritual sense. It negotiated with him. His crimes remained part of the record. His cooperation became another part. At sentencing, both would matter. This is the central bargain of substantial assistance. The defendant gives the government information it could not easily obtain elsewhere. The government gives the defendant a chance to avoid the full punishment otherwise available. Neither side pretends the arrangement is sentimental. The prosecution receives cases. The witness receives consideration. And the public is asked to accept that justice sometimes arrives through a man who helped create the injustice. Michael DiLeonardo had once been useful to the Gambino family because he could earn, organize, and remain silent. Now he was useful to the government because he could remember, explain, and testify. The old organization rewarded secrecy. The new one rewarded disclosure. In both worlds, value determined protection. That should not be ignored. The government treated DiLeonardo better than the mafia had, but not because federal prosecutors had become his family. They needed him. He needed them. The relationship was practical. And unlike the mafia's promise of brotherhood, nobody had to pretend otherwise. The Gambino family called him a traitor. Federal prosecutors called him a cooperating witness. The public might call him lucky, but the most accurate description may be simpler. He was a useful sinner. And in the war against organized crime, useful sinners have always been worth more than silent saints. Sentenced to time served. On September 9, 2011, Michael DiLeonardo returned to federal court for sentencing. By then, nearly 9 years had passed since he first agreed to cooperate. He had admitted his own crimes, endured countless debriefings, testified repeatedly, helped prosecutors pursue members of organized crime, and permanently destroyed any possibility of returning to the Gambino world. Now the government had to answer the question hanging over his entire cooperation. What was all of it worth? DiLeonardo faced the possibility of an extremely severe sentence. His admitted conduct was serious. This was not a defendant seeking mercy for one foolish decision or a brief criminal detour. He had spent decades participating in organized crime. He had risen to captain. He had admitted involvement in murder conspiracies, racketeering, extortion, loan sharking, fraud, and other offenses. Without cooperation, his future could have disappeared into federal prison. But prosecutors urged the court to recognize the extraordinary value of his assistance. They described him as a witness whose knowledge had contributed to numerous prosecutions, convictions, guilty pleas, and financial recoveries. Contemporary accounts credited his cooperation with helping authorities convict roughly 80 organized crime defendants, although totals vary depending on which cases and pleas are included. That was not ordinary cooperation. That was practically a government franchise. DiLeonardo had testified again and again, exposing Gambino family operations and explaining a criminal culture built to remain hidden. Every appearance carried risk. Every answer widened the distance between him and his old life. Every conviction strengthened the argument that his cooperation had produced measurable public benefit. The government asked the judge to weigh that assistance against the crimes DiLeonardo had committed before cooperating. This is where federal sentencing becomes morally complicated. One side of the scale contained years of criminal conduct. The other contained years of helping prosecute criminals. The same man had created harm and later helped authorities confront it. There was no clean arithmetic. How many convictions equal one murder conspiracy? How much testimony balances decades of racketeering? How much useful truth should reduce punishment for earlier lies? The justice system has no perfect formula for those questions. It has judges, which is either reassuring or terrifying, depending on the judge. United States District Judge John Coltle presided over the sentencing in Manhattan. The prosecution emphasized DiLeonardo's extensive assistance. His defense emphasized the personal cost of cooperation, including the destruction of his former relationships and the continuing danger attached to his status as a government witness. DiLeonardo also addressed the court. He described La Cosa Nostra as a destructive force and called it a living, breathing beast, language that reflected how completely his public description of the mafia had changed. The organization he once treated as family was now described as something predatory, something that consumed people, something that survived by feeding on loyalty, fear, and silence. That statement may have reflected genuine disillusionment. It may also have served an obvious purpose at sentencing. A cooperating defendant has every reason to demonstrate remorse and distance himself from his former life. Again, motive does not automatically make the statement false. But the courtroom was not merely a place of confession. It was also the final stage of negotiation. DiLeonardo needed the judge to believe that his cooperation represented more than tactical self-preservation. He needed the court to see transformation, or at least enough transformation to justify mercy. Judge Coltle ultimately sentenced DiLeonardo to time served, approximately 3 years in custody. He was released from confinement, subject to supervision and the continuing realities of life as a protected government witness. For a man whose admitted conduct could have produced a life sentence, the outcome was extraordinary. Critics saw it as proof that the government rewards serious criminals whenever they become useful enough. And frankly, that criticism is not ridiculous. DiLeonardo had participated in a violent criminal organization for decades. Ordinary defendants often receive long sentences for far less serious conduct. Yet he walked out after roughly 3 years because his knowledge had enormous prosecutorial value. Silencing first-hand witnesses would deprive the public of valuable history. The question is how the history is framed. Does the storyteller educate? Does he minimize? Does he acknowledge victims? Does he separate explanation from excuse? Does he treat violence as consequence or merely atmosphere? A former mobster may be uniquely qualified to explain the life. He may also be uniquely motivated to edit it. DiLeonardo's reinvention, therefore, remained inseparable from his past contradictions. He was a man exposing the mythology he once embodied. A witness criticizing the code he once enforced. A former captain receiving attention because of the authority that criminal rank still carried. The mafia had given him a name. The government had given him a new role. The media gave both another life. This does not necessarily represent hypocrisy. People are allowed to change. They are allowed to speak about what they did. They are allowed to use painful experience to educate others. But change should not become another mythology. The redeemed gangster can be as misleading as the honorable gangster. Both stories may simplify a much more complicated person. Michael DiLeonardo did not stop being responsible for his past when he began explaining it. He did, however, gain the opportunity to challenge the culture that created Mikey Scars. That opportunity carries value. It also carries obligation. Tell the truth. Acknowledge the harm. Resist glamorizing the machinery. And remember that the people most affected by organized crime were not always the men giving interviews afterward. They were the business owners, the families, the witnesses, the fraud victims, the people threatened, cheated, injured, or buried while the organization protected its image. DiLeonardo survived the mafia, federal prosecution, cooperation, and sentencing. Then he entered the final and perhaps strangest phase of the story. He became a narrator of the life that nearly destroyed him. Mikey Scars had once earned respect through silence. Now Michael DiLeonardo earned attention by speaking. And in America, there is always an audience ready to hear how the sausage was made. Especially when the sausage may have violated racketeering laws. Was Mikey Scars redeemed? Redemption is one of those words people love using when the paperwork gets uncomfortable. A man commits crimes for decades. Then he cooperates, testifies, expresses regret. And suddenly everyone wants to know whether the story ends with forgiveness. Nice and tidy. Like morality comes with closing credits. Michael DiLeonardo's story does not offer that kind of ending. He helped the government prosecute organized crime figures. He exposed the internal workings of the Gambino family. He described the violence, hypocrisy, and conditional loyalty beneath the mafia's mythology. Those actions mattered. They may have prevented future crimes. They may have helped victims recover money. They may have weakened organizations that depended upon fear and silence. But cooperation did not reverse time. It did not restore money lost through fraud. It did not erase threats made against business owners. It did not bring murder victims home. It did not transform every criminal decision into a misunderstood chapter in a heroic journey. The witness did not replace the mobster. The witness emerged from him. That distinction is essential. DiLeonardo became valuable to prosecutors precisely because he had been deeply involved in organized crime. His later assistance cannot be separated from his earlier participation. One created the knowledge. The other redirected it. This is why redemption cannot be treated like a mathematical exchange. 10 convictions do not automatically cancel one murder conspiracy. 100 hours of testimony do not erase decades of racketeering. There is no moral calculator where the judge enters former capo, subtracts government cooperation, and receives good person. Life is terribly inefficient that way. Redemption, where it exists, is not the removal of responsibility, It is responsibility finally accepted. The person does not say, "That was not really me." He says, "That was me, and I refuse to defend it." That is a harder statement, and a more honest one. DiLeonardo has publicly acknowledged serious wrongdoing and spoken critically about La Cosa Nostra. He has described the organization as destructive and has challenged portions of the romantic mythology surrounding it. That suggests at least some degree of reflection. But no outsider can measure the full depth of another person's remorse. We can observe words, actions, patterns. We cannot inspect the private rooms of conscience. Thank God, the decor would be unbearable. A former criminal may express regret for several reasons. He may genuinely recognize the harm he caused. He may regret losing his freedom. He may regret being betrayed. He may want public acceptance. He may need to believe his later life has repaired some part of the earlier one. Several motives can coexist. Remorse does not become false simply because it also serves a psychological purpose. But neither should audiences accept every confession without examining what the speaker emphasizes. Does he talk mainly about the pain he suffered, or the pain he caused? Does he describe victims as people, or as details inside his personal tragedy? Does he condemn the mafia because it was violent and exploitative, or because it eventually stopped protecting him? Those questions matter. DiLeonardo's turning point came after the Gambino family shelved him. His disillusionment intensified when the organization harmed him personally. That does not make his later criticism meaningless, but it shows that moral clarity arrived after self-interest had already cracked the door open. Again, very human. People rarely abandon destructive systems at the first sign of hypocrisy. They leave when the hypocrisy finally reaches their own chair. The possibility of redemption also depends on what DiLeonardo did after cooperation. He could not undo the past, but he could choose whether to glorify it, minimize it, exploit it, or use it to expose how the mafia recruits, manipulates, and discards its members. Public storytelling can become part of accountability when it strips away illusion. It can show younger viewers that the life leads less often to power than to prison, betrayal, addiction, paranoia, and funerals. But storytelling becomes less redemptive when the warning is delivered through endless admiration of the speaker's old status. I ruined my life, but let me spend 40 minutes explaining how important I was. A classic occupational hazard. DiLeonardo's public image often reflects both sides. He warns against the organization. Yet the name Mikey Scars still carries fascination. He rejects mafia mythology, yet his authority comes from having once occupied a respected place inside it. This tension may never disappear. The man trying to move beyond the identity continues to be invited onto programs because of the identity. Every interview opens the same locked room. Every retelling returns him to the ceremonies, relationships, crimes, and betrayals of his past. Redemption may therefore require more than speaking honestly. It may require resisting the temptation to become trapped inside the story of redemption itself. The former gangster can begin believing his cooperation transformed him into a moral authority. But surviving one destructive system does not automatically produce wisdom in every subject. Sometimes it produces a microphone. The audience supplies the rest. A serious assessment of DiLeonardo must avoid two extremes. The first is total condemnation, the claim that because he committed serious crimes, nothing he did afterward could possess moral value. That view denies the possibility of change. It also ignores the practical good produced by his cooperation. The second is total absolution. The idea that because he helped the government, his earlier conduct should be reduced to background material in an inspiring survival story. That view denies the permanence of harm. Both are too simple. Human beings are not frozen at the worst moment of their lives, but neither are victims required to forget because the offender later became useful. DiLeonardo may have changed. He may have developed genuine remorse. He may have helped protect others from the world he once served. Those possibilities deserve recognition. So does the fact that he received enormous legal benefit for doing so. His cooperation was morally useful and personally advantageous. There is no need to choose only one. Redemption also differs from forgiveness. Society can acknowledge change without declaring every debt paid. Victims may forgive, they may refuse. Either response belongs to them. The public cannot hand out forgiveness on behalf of people it never met. That would be a very American form of generosity. Spend somebody else's money, forgive somebody else's suffering, then congratulate ourselves for emotional growth. What the public can evaluate is conduct. Did DiLeonardo continue committing crimes after cooperation? Did he provide truthful and valuable information? Did he accept responsibility? Did his later actions reduce harm? Those are more useful questions than whether he became a good man. The phrase is too broad, too easy, too flattering. Redemption is better understood as direction. Where did the person move after recognizing the damage? Toward denial? Toward nostalgia? Toward accountability? Toward service? Toward another profitable version of the same old myth? DiLeonardo moved away from active organized crime and toward cooperation, testimony, and public explanation. That movement mattered. It was not complete moral purification. It was movement. And movement is often the only honest form redemption takes. No choir, no halo, no dramatic washing away of sin beneath the courthouse fountain. Just choices made after the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Michael DiLeonardo cannot change the man he was. He can only determine whether that man's history continues serving the mafia or becomes evidence against it. In that sense, cooperation was not redemption itself. It was the beginning of the argument. The government rewarded him. The mafia condemned him. The public remains fascinated. But the final verdict belongs to no single institution. Redemption cannot be granted by prosecutors. It cannot be revoked by gangsters. And it cannot be proven through a podcast appearance. It exists, where it exists in the long distance between admitting what you were and refusing to become it again. Michael DiLeonardo may have traveled part of that distance. Whether he reached the end is not for mythology to decide, and unlike the mafia, reality does not award honorary titles for showing up in a nice suit. Loyalty or dependence. The mafia loves the word loyalty. It sounds noble, ancient, almost romantic. A man stands beside his brothers, keeps his word, protects the family, accepts sacrifice without complaint. Beautiful stuff. Until you examine the arrangement and realize one side receives obedience, money, silence, and occasionally murder, while the other side receives vague promises and a funeral collection. Healthy loyalty is voluntary. It survives disagreement. It allows a person to retain conscience, dignity, and the right to leave. It does not require threats. It does not demand criminal obedience. And it does not define independence as betrayal. Mafia loyalty operated differently. It was reinforced through fear, identity, financial dependence, social isolation, and the constant reminder that leaving could carry permanent consequences. That is not ordinary loyalty. It is dependence wearing a medal. Michael DiLeonardo believed he belonged to something larger than himself. The Gambino family gave him status, purpose, community, a name, a place inside a hierarchy that told him exactly who he was and how he should behave. That certainty can be enormously attractive. Ordinary life is messy. People change careers. Relationships fail. Authority must be questioned. Identity develops slowly. The mafia offered a shortcut. Join the family, follow the rules, earn respect, become somebody. Of course, the shortcut led through federal court, but nobody puts that on the recruiting poster. The organization also reduced the number of relationships available outside itself. The deeper a member entered the life, the more his friendships, finances, reputation, and safety became connected to other criminals. This made departure increasingly difficult. Leaving would not simply mean losing a job. It could mean losing income, protection, identity, community, and access to nearly everyone who understood his world. That is how dependence strengthens. The group becomes the source of both danger and safety. It threatens the member, then offers protection from the threat. It creates isolation, then presents itself as the only true family remaining. It damages the person's ability to live outside the system, then points to that damage as proof he belongs inside it. Very efficient. DiLeonardo's loyalty was therefore not entirely false. He appears to have felt genuine attachment toward men inside the organization, particularly John Gotti Jr. But genuine emotion can exist inside an unhealthy structure. A person may sincerely love people whose expectations are destructive. He may feel real brotherhood within an institution that uses brotherhood as control. The feelings do not need to be fake for the relationship to become coercive. That is what makes these systems powerful. If everything were cold manipulation, people would leave more easily. The affection keeps them invested. The danger keeps them obedient. DiLeonardo's relationship with the Gambino family contained both. He received status and belonging. He also understood that disobedience could carry severe consequences. The organization did not need to threaten him every morning. The culture had already placed the threat inside his thinking. He knew what happened to informants. He knew what happened to men considered disloyal. He understood that silence was not simply encouraged, it was enforced. Once fear becomes internalized, direct orders become less necessary. The member polices himself. He avoids certain thoughts, suppresses doubts, explains away hypocrisy, and remains loyal partly because the alternative has been made psychologically unbearable. This is closer to dependence than devotion. The mafia also used sacrifice to strengthen attachment. Every risk DiLeonardo accepted made it harder to leave. Every crime committed for the family tied him more deeply to it. Every secret increased his isolation from ordinary society. Every year inside created more evidence that could be used against him. The organization became both his identity and his legal vulnerability. He needed the family partly because serving the family had made life outside it more dangerous. A magnificent little trap. First, compromise the recruit. Then call the compromise loyalty. DiLeonardo's rise to captain deepened this dependence. Rank increased his prestige, but it also increased his exposure. He knew more. directed more, earned more, and carried greater responsibility for the actions of those beneath him. The higher he climbed, the fewer realistic exits remained. Success inside the mafia made freedom outside it increasingly expensive. That is another contradiction hidden beneath the mythology. Promotion appeared to represent independence. In reality, it created additional chains. A captain could command others, but he still answered upward. He could collect money, but he owed tribute. The organization also reduced the number of relationships available outside itself. The deeper a member entered the life, the more his friendships, finances, reputation, and safety became connected to other criminals. This made departure increasingly difficult. Leaving would not simply mean losing a job. It could mean losing income, protection, identity, community, and access to nearly everyone who understood his world. That is how dependence strengthens. The group becomes the source of both danger and safety. It threatens the member, then offers protection from the threat. It creates isolation, then presents itself as the only true family remaining. It damages the person's ability to live outside the system, then points to that damage as proof he belongs inside it. Very efficient. DiLeonardo's loyalty was therefore not entirely false. He appears to have felt genuine attachment toward men inside the organization, particularly John Gotti Jr. But genuine emotion can exist inside an unhealthy structure. A person may sincerely love people whose expectations are destructive. He may feel real brotherhood within an institution that uses brotherhood as control. The feelings do not need to be fake for the relationship to become coercive. That is what makes these systems powerful. If everything were cold manipulation, people would leave more easily. The affection keeps them invested. The danger keeps them obedient. DiLeonardo's relationship with the Gambino family contained both. He received status and belonging. He also understood that disobedience could carry severe consequences. The organization did not need to threaten him every morning. The culture had already placed the threat inside his thinking. He knew what happened to informants. He knew what happened to men considered disloyal. He understood that silence was not simply encouraged. It was enforced. Once fear becomes internalized, direct orders become less necessary. The member polices himself. He avoids certain thoughts, suppresses doubts, explains away hypocrisy, and remains loyal partly because the alternative has been made psychologically unbearable. This is closer to dependence than devotion. The mafia also used sacrifice to strengthen attachment. Every risk DiLeonardo accepted made it harder to leave. Every crime committed for the family tied him more deeply to it. Every secret increased his isolation from ordinary society. Every year inside created more evidence that could be used against him. The organization became both his identity and his legal vulnerability. He needed the family partly because serving the family had made life outside it more dangerous. A magnificent little trap. First, compromise the recruit. Then call the compromised loyalty. DiLeonardo's rise to captain deepened this dependence. Rank increased his prestige, but it also increased his exposure. He knew more, directed more, earned more, and carried greater responsibility for the actions of those beneath him. The higher he climbed, the fewer realistic exits remained. Success inside the mafia made freedom outside it increasingly expensive. That is another contradiction hidden beneath the mythology. Promotion appeared to represent independence. In reality, it created additional chains. A captain could command others, but he still answered upward. He could collect money, but he owed tribute. He could settle disputes, but only within limits established by the administration. He appeared powerful while remaining dependent upon the approval of men above him. When that approval disappeared, so did much of his power. DiLeonardo discovered this after being shelved. His rank had felt permanent because the organization described membership as lifelong. But leadership could remove his practical authority without giving him meaningful recourse. He could not appeal to an independent board. There was no union representative, no mediation process, no calm meeting with human resources. Just silence, accusations, and the possibility that complaining too loudly might shorten the discussion considerably. Being shelved revealed that DiLeonardo's status had always been conditional. He was respected while leadership considered him useful, protected while his value exceeded his cost, included while his presence benefited the enterprise. When those calculations changed, the Sacred Brotherhood became surprisingly flexible. This is the difference between loyalty and dependency. Loyalty recognizes the person. Dependency values the function. A loyal friend may stand beside someone even when the relationship becomes inconvenient. A criminal organization stands beside a member while the numbers still work. DiLeonardo had interpreted organizational support as personal affection. The shelving forced him to confront the possibility that the family valued what he produced more than who he was. That realization helped destroy the emotional foundation beneath Omerta. If the relationship had been reciprocal, remaining silent might have felt like loyalty. Once reciprocity disappeared, silence began looking like submission. He was expected to accept life imprisonment for men who had already withdrawn support. That was not devotion to a brotherhood. It was dependence surviving after the relationship had ended. The mafia needed members to confuse the two. It needed them to believe fear was respect. Obedience was honor. Isolation was belonging. And the inability to leave was proof of commitment. This confusion allowed the organization to control men who thought they were exercising strength. The made man appeared independent because civilians feared him. Yet his own choices remained constrained by hierarchy, secrecy, and possible retaliation. He could intimidate a shopkeeper, but he could not safely tell his boss no. A strange definition of freedom. DiLeonardo's cooperation represented the breaking of that dependence. Not cleanly, not nobly, not without self-interest, but decisively. He transferred his reliance from the mafia to the government. That should not be romanticized either. Federal prosecutors now possessed enormous influence over his sentence and future. He still needed an institution. The difference was that the new relationship did not pretend to be sacred. The government offered a transaction. Tell the truth. Testify. Remain useful. Receive consideration. No burning saint card. No eternal brotherhood. Just paperwork and consequences. Oddly enough, the honest bargain may have been healthier than the false family. DiLeonardo's story therefore forces us to examine loyalty more carefully. Loyalty is not automatically admirable. It becomes admirable when attached to something worthy. A person can remain loyal to cruelty, corruption, abuse, a destructive institution. The depth of commitment does not purify the object receiving it. Sometimes the bravest act is remaining. Sometimes the bravest act is leaving. And sometimes leaving happens only after the institution makes loyalty impossible. Michael DiLeonardo spent decades believing he was loyal to the Gambino family. But the family had constructed a world in which loyalty, fear, identity, and dependence were nearly impossible to separate. When he finally cooperated, the mafia said he had revealed his true character. Perhaps. But his cooperation also revealed the true character of the organization. It demanded lifelong devotion. It offered temporary protection. It called members brothers. Then evaluated them like assets. The mafia promised belonging. What it created was dependence. And dependence lasts only until the person realizes the cage has been calling itself a home. The final contradiction. The central contradiction in Michael DiLeonardo's story is brutally simple. He joined an organization that worshipped loyalty while practicing betrayal as a daily operating procedure. The mafia spoke endlessly about brotherhood. Then bosses murdered subordinates. Captains stole from soldiers. Crews hid money from the administration. Allies changed sides. Friends cooperated. And men who shared ceremonies later discussed one another with prosecutors, lawyers, or whoever happened to control the better bargaining position. Everybody condemned betrayal. Everybody kept it nearby. The organization did not survive because its members were uniquely loyal. It survived because enough of them believed everyone else was too frightened to break the rules. That is not trust. It is mutually assured paranoia. DiLeonardo had spent decades accepting the mythology. The family came first. The oath was permanent. A made man's word meant something. The organization would protect those who protected it. Then he became inconvenient. And the sacred code suddenly developed exceptions. The Gambino administration questioned his money, removed his status, withdrew support, and expected him to remain silent while facing the possibility of dying in prison. This was the arrangement stripped of ceremony. The member owed everything. The leadership owed nothing. Still, the mafia insisted DiLeonardo's cooperation represented the destruction of honor. As though honor had been thriving beautifully until one frightened captain entered a federal interview room. It had not. Betrayal was not introduced by informants. It was built into the system. Every member knew loyalty could become dangerous. A close friend might be ordered to kill him. A superior might sacrifice him to protect the administration. A partner might hide income. A defendant might cooperate. A boss might decide an old friendship had become a legal liability. The men called one another brothers because temporary criminal associates with overlapping financial interests sounded less inspiring during induction. The mafia's history is filled with internal treachery. Paul Castellano was killed by members of his own family. John Gotti was convicted after Sammy Gravano cooperated. Crews competed for money. Leaders manipulated rules. Members accused one another of theft, disrespect, and disloyalty whenever power shifted. Yet every generation insisted the previous generation possessed more honor. This is one of nostalgia's favorite tricks. The past becomes noble once most of the witnesses are dead. DiLeonardo's cooperation exposed the truth beneath that nostalgia. The code of silence was never proof of brotherhood. It was the mechanism that prevented everyone from discovering how little brotherhood actually existed. Silence protected the illusion. Once insiders began speaking, the organization looked less like an ancient order and more like a collection of frightened businessmen arguing over stolen money. The ceremony created permanence. The conduct created instability. The language promised family. The hierarchy produced competition. The rules demanded sacrifice. The leadership practiced convenience. This contradiction did not merely weaken the mafia legally. It weakened it psychologically. A member can endure enormous pressure if he believes the group deserves his sacrifice. He can accept prison, financial loss, separation from family, even death. But once he realizes the institution would not make the same sacrifice for him, loyalty begins to rot. That rot had already spread through organized crime long before DiLeonardo cooperated. The government simply learned how to use it. Prosecutors did not need to convince every mobster that crime was immoral. They only needed to convince one defendant that his friends were not worth life imprisonment. The mafia usually handled the rest. A missed payment, a disputed envelope, a leadership insult, a shelved captain, a family refusing legal support. Every act of internal betrayal gave federal investigators another opening. The organization's greatest weakness was not surveillance. It was hypocrisy. DiLeonardo's story illustrates that weakness perfectly. He had been deeply loyal. That loyalty was morally corrupted but emotionally real. He believed in the family. He defended it. Earned for it. Protected its secrets. Then the organization treated his loyalty as disposable. The result was not simply another informant. It was a former believer explaining how the religion worked. That was far more dangerous. An outsider can describe mafia violence. An insider can describe the faith that made the violence possible. The rituals, the hierarchy, the language, the emotional manipulation, the promise that belonging justified every sacrifice. DiLeonardo could explain why men remained silent even when silence destroyed them. He knew because he had nearly done the same. This is why former believers often become powerful witnesses against closed systems. They do not merely expose conduct, they expose meaning. They explain what the members thought they were protecting and why the protection eventually failed. The Gambino family believed shelving DiLeonardo would isolate a problem. Instead, it liberated a witness. Leadership viewed him as an asset that had become unreliable. The government viewed him as a library with a plea agreement. Once he began speaking, decades of secrecy became usable evidence. The family had created his loyalty, then destroyed it, then acted surprised when the knowledge left with him. Beautiful management. No notes. The final contradiction also belongs to DiLeonardo himself. He condemned betrayal only after becoming a betrayer. He recognized the mafia's cruelty most clearly after becoming its target. He exposed a system he had spent years helping enforce. He spoke about the damage after benefiting from it. These contradictions do not invalidate his later actions, but they prevent the story from becoming comfortable. DiLeonardo was not simply the man who revealed mafia hypocrisy. He had lived inside that hypocrisy, participated in it, profited from it, and helped preserve it until the institution turned against him. That makes his testimony more valuable and his moral position more complicated. He understood the lie because he had believed it. He understood the machinery because he had operated it. He understood betrayal because he had suffered it and committed it. The mafia wanted the public to see a simple traitor. The government wanted juries to see a credible witness. The truth was larger. Michael DiLeonardo became evidence of the organization's deepest failure. It could enforce silence. It could not create genuine loyalty. It could inspire fear. It could not guarantee trust. It could demand sacrifice. It could not offer reciprocity. And once one of its own members recognized those limits, the entire mythology became vulnerable. The mafia did not collapse because men like Mikey Scars suddenly became morally pure. It weakened because men like Mikey Scars realized the organization was not worth dying for. That realization was more destructive than any bullet. The Gambino family had spent decades telling Michael DiLeonardo that betrayal was the worst thing a man could do. Then it betrayed him first, and expected silence afterward. That was the final contradiction. The organization demanded faith, but behaved in a way that made faith impossible. The man, the myth, and the informant. Mikey Scars. DiLeonardo spent decades building a life around the Gambino crime family. He learned its rules, accepted its values, rose through its hierarchy, earned money beneath its protection, participated in its crimes, and believed the loyalty he gave would eventually be returned. It was not. When the pressure arrived, the organization he had served treated him as expendable. The brotherhood became bookkeeping. The sacred oath became a one-sided invoice. And the man who had spent most of his life protecting mafia secrets became one of the government's most valuable witnesses. That transformation does not make DiLeonardo innocent. It does not erase his choices. It does not restore the lives damaged by the criminal world he helped maintain. But it does expose the fraud beneath the mafia's favorite mythology. The organization did not operate through honor. It operated through fear, money, dependency, and silence. Loyalty was sacred only while it remained profitable. Family meant family until someone became inconvenient. Then suddenly, everybody discovered boundaries. Mikey Scars betrayed the Gambino family. That is true, but the Gambino family had already betrayed nearly every principle it claimed to represent. It demanded sacrifice without reciprocity, silence without protection, obedience without conscience, and lifelong devotion to men who treated one another as replaceable assets. DiLeonardo's story is therefore not simply about a mobster who became an informant. It is about the collapse of belief, the moment when a man realizes the institution defining his identity never valued him as deeply as he valued it. That realization did not transform him into a hero, it transformed him into a witness. And witnesses are dangerous because they turn private mythology into public evidence. The mafia called him a rat. The government called him a cooperator. The truth is less tidy. Michael DiLeonardo was a criminal who helped prosecute criminals. A betrayed man who became a betrayer. A former captain whose knowledge eventually became more valuable than his silence. He spent years protecting the Gambino family. Then he survived by explaining exactly how it worked. That is the final lesson of Mikey Scars. The Mafia did not lose him because the government suddenly taught him morality. It lost him because the organization proved its own promises were worthless. The brotherhood was conditional, the loyalty was transactional, and the honor was mostly decoration. Michael DiLeonardo walked into the life believing the family would make him somebody. He walked out after discovering that, to the family, he had always been something much simpler, useful, until he was not. This has been Analyzing Evil. Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo, Loyalty, Betrayal, and the Making of a Mob Informant. For more deep dives into organized crime, criminal psychology, historical scandals, and the glorious parade of bad decisions people make while insisting they are men of honor, subscribe to Pizzaverse Studios. This series is produced by Palermo Productions, where we separate documented history from street mythology, courtroom evidence from recycled gossip, and actual loyalty from whatever the hell these guys were calling it. Like the video. Share it with somebody who enjoys mob history without needing the criminals polished into folk heroes. And leave your verdict in the comments. Was Mikey Scars a betrayed soldier? A calculating informant? A man trying to survive? Or was he all three, tangled together in one expensive suit? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next episode of Analyzing Evil. Because around here, we do not just repeat the legend. We check the indictments. Thank you for watching Analyzing Evil. Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo, Loyalty, Betrayal, and the Making of a Mob Informant. A special thank you to everyone supporting Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions. Every view, comment, share, and subscription helps us keep producing independent documentaries about organized crime, criminal psychology, forgotten scandals, and the beautifully dressed disasters hiding behind American mythology. Your support keeps the cameras rolling, the research moving, and the paperwork stacked high enough to frighten a defense attorney. So leave your thoughts below. Share the episode with somebody who appreciates a good mob story, but still understands that extortion is not a personality trait. And remember, when an organization keeps insisting everyone is family, check whether the Legal Defense Fund still answers the phone. Until next time, stay curious, question the mythology, and keep one eye on the receipts. See you at the next one.